Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Tyrion. The day of the march to the wall was approaching rapidly, far faster than anyone was hoping it would. The armies were going to set out from Winterfell and arrive 3 days before the dead were believed to, and that was a fortnight away. But no matter how much everyone worked, no matter how much they persevered through the cold and snows that winter had, everything did not feel enough. The shipments of raw iron for weapons and armor had stopped arriving, not because of depletion, but there was no more time to make any more runs from Winterfell to the suppliers. The armorers and smiths had made enough boiled leather and chainmail that their fingerprints were worn away, but the constant efforts and labor among them built their muscle, ready to switch from swing hammers to swinging axes and swords. But one smith in particular kept to wielding his hammer. Gendry had attempted to learn swordplay, but he said it didn't feel natural to him, and using a hammer was better. He even went as far as to forge a new warhammer that had spikes of dragon glass to impale the dead deep enough for the effect to work on them. The Dothraki traditionally never wore steel armor, or any for that matter, but they took to using chainmail shirts under their furs, and few of them still wore the Lannister armor, looted from the Blackwater Rush. The wildlings, on the other hand, had no rejection when it came to such matters. All of them, the women and the children of the north, who were fighting alongside the men, were outfitted with northern boiled armor and looked like they were all soldiers of House Stark. It would have been hard to tell the wildlings apart if not for them all wearing heavy fur coats over their armor. The only armor Tyrion ever wore was the set made for him for the battle against Stannis Baratheon's forces, but a smith from the Vale was kind enough to make him a small steel breastplate and bracers. He wouldn't be in much need of such protection since he wouldn't be in the heart of the battle. He would be wielding a crossbow alongside the other archers since every arrow was almost as tall as he was. But that was the last thing on his mind he was concerned about, since a raven with a scroll marked with the symbol of the hand arrived just moments ago. He was in the company of Varys on the balconies of the castle surrounding the training yard. They were waiting for Sansa and Daenerys to join them, and passed the time by watching Jon spar against Bronn and the Hound. Surprisingly to all who watched, Jon was holding his own against the brute strength of Sansar Clegane and the dirty tactics of Bronn. They had been going at it for near 2 hours now, and the only one not exhausted was Jon himself. "Come on," he said, once more. "In a moment," Bronn told him as he had his hands on his knees, wheezing for breath. "Where in fuck's sake to get so much energy?" Sandor held his greatsword in both hands, preparing to go again. "Maybe if you'd stop fucking that Dornish girl, you'd have some left to fight." Bronn laughed out loud, but he was the only one amused. There had been a great many complaints that he and Talion were sometimes too loud at night, but also some whispers that in the camp that it was pleasing since the Wintertown brothel was frequently busy and only had several whores. "Did you know that no man has ever fucked a Dornish woman? There's because they're the ones who do all of the fucking. And unlike you, you big celibate giant, I've been behind on some important work and just trying to catch up." Things would have turned into a brawl had Brienne of Tarth not shown up to join them, against Jon on his request. "Forgive me for being tardy, Your Grace." She undid her sword belt and placed it on a rack, swapping Oathkeeper for a sparring sword. "About time you showed up," Bronn told her. "The king doesn't know when to take a break." "If only you knew how to, as well," Sandor angrily replied. All of them readied themselves to fight against Jon, and all of the onlookers had a wave of excitement to see what would occur. "I'm surprised Edric Dane isn't down there with them," Tyrion commented. "He's so eager to become the greatest. I feel he wants to be the rival of our king." "He's in a meeting with the other Dornish lords and commanders," Varys informed, hands folded into his robes as always. "I've no little birds in the camps to hear the whispers they say, but the men they command are talking of rumors to leave and reclaim their home." Tyrion grew concerned and shifted his gaze from the match to Varys. "Are you certain? While it is only rumors for now, it could well turn into truth, and then action. But I believe Lord Dane won't let that happen when the dead are so close to us." Tyrion thought that it might not be the only reason they wouldn't return home. Ever since Robert's rebellion came to an end, Dorne has remained neutral from any conflicts that arose in the Seven Kingdoms, except for their own. The Dornish people hated it, but their prince commanded it. If they ran from one war to fight their own, they would be considered fools and cowards by all of the world. Men who only fight the war around them when they feel like it. He won't, Tyrion said, sounding adamant. He knows that the dead have to be dealt with first, and so does every other person in this army. The sound of clashing steel turned their attention back to the match, and Jon was facing off Brienne and Sandor, while Bronn was on the ground, clutching at his stomach. "Have you read the scroll yet?" Tyrion asked. "It's sealed for the king and queen," Varys told him, but Tyrion knew the spider better than that. "What does it say?" Varys sighed in disappointment. "Hardly any good." The sound of footsteps approaching drew their attention to Lady Sansa and Queen Daenerys, finally joining them. "Apologies for being late," Sansa told them. While Jon had to be preparing for the war, Sansa would be the one to help him with things that didn't regard the battle. "There is no need," Tyrion said, "but now that you're here, we can see what Cersei has to say to us." Horus unfolded his hands and revealed the scroll. He broke the seal and unraveled the parchment, reading it aloud. "As long as I am the only one who can keep any secret, the traitors trying to save the city from a fiery death shall remain unnoticed. I am not turning my allegiance from the rightful queen. But I do not want to die before my work is completed, and such rash actions pose a threat. I wish you good fortune in the battle against the dead." Signed by the hand of the queen, Qyburn, Varys let the scroll roll back into itself before handing it to Daenerys. With the knowledge that the scroll contained, there would be one less thing to worry about. Without the abilities of Brandon Stark, such a thing would have been thought to have been a bluff or ruse. But now it looked like there was a thread of hope for the city, even if it could be cut at any point. "Who is this Qyburn?" Sansa asked. The only one who had any decent knowledge of him was Tyrion. He was once a Maester, but he was expelled when he was caught doing experiments that were very unethical to the Order's reputation. But that doesn't deny that he is one of the best healers in Westeros. "You call what he did to the mountain healing?" Sansa doubtfully asked. "I didn't say that his work was absolutely medical, only unethical. He does what Samwell Tarly did for Serra Jorah." "He cures grayscale?" Daenerys asked. "No, he does what the Maesters are too afraid to try to do. I'm not defending his reasons, of course, but his research saved my brother's entire forearm after his hand was severed. Not that it mattered in a sense." The conversation was interrupted by a loud thud, and everyone turned their gaze to the sparring match and saw Jon on his back, with Sandor Clegane standing over him with his greatsword over Jon's chest. Brienne stood across from the Hound, her sword lying next to Bronn, who was just now getting up. "By time someone knocked you on your royal ass," Bronn commented as Jon got onto his feet, disregarding any respect he should be showing. Brienne took notice of that when she retrieved her sparring sword. "Do you have no respect for anyone?" she asked, anger present in her tone. "Only a few in this world, the rest are all dead. But none for your king. When I pledged myself to the Targaryens, it was to the queen up there." He pointed his sword up to the balcony. He then switched to pointing it at Jon. "Until I see him give me a reason to call him king. He's just a lad with too many titles." "That never stopped you from calling the Lancer bastards king," Sandor reminded. "Aye, because the Lannisters were feared when Tywin was alive. And with eyes and ears everywhere, no one could even talk shit about them without worrying about having their head on spike." "That is true," Jon informed, "and I am not one who would do something like that just for someone speaking ill of me. But if I must take action to discipline, he who acts to free regard with thought to those among him." Bronn raised his brow, wondering what could be in store for such a person. "And if I chose not to, what then? Will my head be taken from my shoulders?" Cersei did say that was the only way to kill a Stark these days. Everyone could see Jon's fists clench and his knuckles whiten when Bronn was bold enough to say such a thing. That would happen if you continued defiance. But ever since I realized my Targaryen heritage, I've thought that maybe I should feed traitors and scum to the dragons. Good thing it doesn't look like it's about to happen right now. Bronn patted Jon on his shoulder and began to walk away. Jon took a deep breath before giving his response. "Then why don't we fix that? Brienne, Sandor, if wouldn't mind bringing him with me." Before Bronn realized what was happening, Sandor and Brienne seized Bronn by his arms and dragged him against his will as they followed Jon outside of the training yard. "So he's going to kill the Lord of the Twins?" "Bronn has helped us in more ways than one," Tyrion said. "He's one of the best fighters we have, and a good commander. And why should I allow such people to hold lands and armies, when they have no respect for those they pledged to fight for? Why should I let another Walder Frey hold the twins? Despite how well you rule and change the world, there'll always be men like Walder Frey, but Bronn is far from him. Not far enough, it seems. They all followed Jon outside of Winterfell, and towards where the dragons nested. When they left the gates, they gathered a small following of soldiers, curious as to what was happening. As they neared the presence of the dragons, Drogon and Rhaegal lifted their heads up to see what was approaching them. Drogon's gaze fell on Bronn and he began to stir. "Oh, fuck," Bronn said as Jon stopped and he was pulled next to him. "Let him go," Jon ordered. Sandor and Brienne kindly obeyed and Bronn was frozen in his place. "Walk forward, Ser Bronn. I'd rather hang myself than get close to that big fucker." Jon shoved Bronn forward, causing him to fall on his knees a few feet away. Tyrion quickly walked up to, hoping that he would listen to reason. "Your Grace, I'm begging you to reconsider what you're about. Do. We need every man who can fight, and Bronn happens to be one of the better ones." Jon looked at Tyrion, revealing a sly smile before looking at the dragons. His eyes flashed white, and so did the eyes of Drogon and Rhaegal. Bronn was shaking in his place, as they crawled closer to him. "Your Grace," Bronn called out, "please, show mercy." Never before had Tyrion seen Bronn so afraid. And there was no reason for him not to be, when he shot down one of them. The two dragons opened their mouths slightly, looking prepared to unleash a fury of fire on Bronn. Everyone held their breaths as they arched their necks back and opened their mouths wide. But instead of fire they let out loud roars, their heads only feet away from Bronn. The force they let out made Bronn fall backwards. His eyes were clenched shut and his arms in front of his face. When the roaring stopped, the dragons backed away from Bronn, and Jon's eyes returned to their normal brown. He stepped forward and knelt down to Bronn, who was still shaking, where he laid in the snow. "I don't give a rat's ass about what people say about me. I was raised a bastard after all, but I do care when others insult my family and those who follow me. I didn't ask to be king until the queen asked me to be hers. I don't give a damn about crowns or titles, but I care for those who put their faith in me and I will serve them as best I can, when we fight against the dead and until the day I die. But if you have none in me, why should I care about you?" Jon patted Bronn on his shoulder before leaving him in the snow. Tyrion was speechless as Jon walked past him and joined Daenerys and the others back to the castle, but overjoyed that he didn't roast Bronn. Bronn was still shaking a little when Tyrion walked up to him. "Are you all right?" "Some shit has come out," Bronn admitted. "I could tell," Tyrion said amusingly, as the scent began to fill the air. "Better your shit than you turning into dragon shit." Bronn nodded slightly. "Aye, much better." Arya. The sounds of the great hall were never lacking any merriment in the nights of winter, as long as there were northerners and ale in it. The only one who wasn't in such a high mood was he who suffered an encounter with the dragons, even after downing 3 mugs of the North's strongest brew and a new pair of breeches. Not even Tyen could charm any seduction to bring him out of his state of mental petrification, but then Tormund solved the dilemma with a mug of free-folk ale. Whatever was in it, it was strong enough to make Bronn spray the first sip over 4 people and cause an uproar of laughter from some of the wildlings. She was intrigued to try some herself at first, but then she remembered Jon and Daenerys' wedding feast and her hangover. She kept to light drinking and her portions of bread and rabbit stew. Meals were the only time Arya could let herself relax and not worry about preparing for war. While her family ate at the high table, she decided to join the masses with Gendry and Sandor sitting with her seeing, as they were better company. "I didn't think your brother could be so terrifying," Gendry said before taking a large bite of stew, dipped bread. "He isn't," Arya said. "The dragons are." "You obviously haven't fought him yet," Sandor told her, eating chicken stew instead of rabbit. "You were there at the dragon pit when I dueled him," Arya reminded. "I was, but after practicing with him today, what he did back then wasn't a fight." "Then, what was it?" Sandor started chuckling to himself before he answered. "Pity." "I saw the fight too, you know," Gendry told them. "That was definitely not pity." "Have you fought anyone at all with that hammer of yours?" Sandor asked. "And I mean a real fight." "I've killed 2 gold cloaks when I left King's Landing. Caught them completely off guard." "Off guard?" "So their swords weren't drawn, and they didn't know what was coming." Yeah. "Then whoop the fucking day," A real fight is when you another man in front you trying to end your life without a fucking care who you are and what you've done. That's war, and that's where we're headed. Are you sure you want to do battle with the men instead of the women and children? Gendry slammed his fists on the table and stood up, staring the hound down with a great anger. Fuck you, you limping dog. I could best you in any duel, now that you're not even half of what you once were. Sandor stared him down before slowly standing up, rising much higher than Gendry. Do you want to learn how to fight? To really fight, instead of being a smith? Gendry didn't break his gaze from Sandor's. I want to learn how to win. Then stop swinging your hammer in a forge and start swinging it at me. Tomorrow with Tarth and her squire. Now sit down and shut your hole. Gendry looked on the verge of breaking his rage over such a matter, confirming he truly was a Baratheon. But whether or not he acted on it would define if he was the Baratheons before him or the Baratheon he wanted to be. He slowly relaxed his fists and sat back down in his seat, Sandor following after him. Arya scoffed as she rolled her eyes and ate her food. She did as Gendry was doing and dipped her bread into her soup before eating. The taste was delicious and reminded her of the last meal she had from Hot Pie at the crossroads, but his food was better. I wish Hot Pie was here. Me too, Gendry agreed. As he calmed down and resumed eating, no one could cook like him. Who's got hot pies? Tormund asked as he shoved someone aside to take a seat next to Sandor. I've only had one pie before, and it was the greatest thing I ever ate. Arya failed to suppress some laughter, as did Gendry. We're talking about our friend. His name is Hot Pie. Tormund looked disappointed in a way that one does when they drop delicious food on the ground. Oh, little Stark. You cannot get my hopes up with talk of pies then. Smash them by telling me you're talking about people. Tormund take a quick swig of the concoction that no one south of the wall could stomach. Who is this man of pies? He was with us when we escaped the castle in the Riverlands. Ygritte informed. The fat one from the crossroads? Sandor asked. Yeah, best cook you'll ever meet. I saw him before I came north. Arya informed. Brienne even told me that he made some direwolf bread for me. He told her it turned out much better than the first one. He bakes bread out of direwolves? Tormund asked. No, Arya corrected. It was in the shape of a direwolf. If you could call that shape a direwolf. Arya smacked Gendry over the shoulder. It was his first try, and it tasted excellent. Gendry nearly choked on his food, laughing with Arya. Do you think he's still there at the inn? I know he is. Maybe I'll invite him to come to Storm's End with me, Gendry suggested before finishing his bowl. Don't you dare, Arya said. I was going to ask him to come to Winterfell. If you came with us to the Stormlands, then we wouldn't have to have such an argument. If Hot Pie came with me, then you would have to come to the north. Tormund raised his brow as the conversation pressed on. Are you two fucking... Arya's gaze quickly shot to Tormund to see if he was drunk or honestly asking. Unfortunately, it was both. No, Arya exclaimed. Why not? Because we're not like that. Oh, I get it, Tormund said. You don't know how. We know how, Gendry told him. Then why? You both are acting like Jon and Ygritte before they broke his vows. Arya had no idea who Ygritte was, but her name was close to Ygritte's. She realized that the woman Tormund spoke of was who Jon named the dragon after. Who's Ygritte? She was a free folk and a ginger, like me, but her hair was as orange as the eyes of the white dragon, and she was the one who taught Jon how to be free and how to see someone before you love them like you never have before. That was all it took for Arya to confirm the origin of Ygritte's name. What happened to her? Gendry asked. Sandor stole Tormund's mug from him and downed its contents, not enjoying his presence in such a discussion. Tormund let him be as he leaned closer to Arya and Gendry. After we made Jon one of us, we all scaled the wall together. Took us hours, but when we got to the top, he began chuckling to himself. Let's just say that if they were the only ones there, the two of them would have been breaking his vows for days. Arya shuddered at the thought of that lingering in her mind. But you were there. So what happened? It was Ygritte's first time seeing your country, the first time seeing a land that wasn't covered in snow. It was like watching the two of them fall in love all over again. But then we got to the other side and Jon had to reveal he was still a crow. She had the chance to kill him before he made it back to the wall, but she let him go. Then at Castle Black she had him right in front of her, but she couldn't do it. That's when the child crow that stabbed Jon shot an arrow through her. She died in his arms that night, and was burned by the weirwood a mile north of the wall. Arya felt sad knowing Jon went through such a thing. He got the chance to love someone as a man of the Watch, but his love for her died when she did. No, Tormund said, the ones we love never die, not all the way. They take new forms, like Ygritte. Why do you think he named her that? Arya felt comforted with that kind of knowledge. It made her wonder if the same love she had for her father would take a new form one day. Thank you for telling me about her. Arya set her mug on her plate and left it there for a servant to collect it later. She got out of her seat and began to leave the Great Hall. Gendry was going to join her, but Tormund stopped him. Wow, now boy, you're not going anywhere until you learn a valuable lesson about women. Now then, when you're in bed with one, most men fuck like dogs. Jon. The days passed quickly, and before anyone knew it, the armies of the world had begun the great march to the wall, and perhaps even to their deaths. Instead of riding the dragons straight to the wall, Jon and Daenerys chose to go on horseback with the armies. Even if they wanted to ride the dragons, they wouldn't be able to. For a few days before everyone left Winterfell, the dragons had been a bit more aggressive and territorial to everyone, including Jon and Daenerys. Jon at one point tried to warg into them all to keep control, but their instincts overpowered him greatly. For some reason they were all in a very protective state, especially towards Ygritte. She was in pain when Jon tried to control the dragons, and couldn't understand why. Not wanting to let the red dragon egg be so close to a battle, Daenerys left it in Winterfell under the care of those too old and too young to join the march. Such a thing was too precious to her to let near an evil so great. Her doing that reminded Jon of why he sent Ygritte and Lyras away from the Night's Watch when he hatched them almost 2 years ago. The march itself wasn't any obstacle for anyone. They days and nights were kind without the presence of snowfall, and with the free folk at the head of the march, leading all to their destination. The time they were making was perfect. They were followed by the Unsullied, and behind them rode Jon and Daenerys, with the forces of the north. The Dothraki rode at the back, taking advantage of the snow being packed down hard into a good path for their horses. Evening began to creep over the Westeros. By the time the armies crossed over the last river, there was a small settling of trees, not too far away, that would provide enough wood for fires to keep the warmth that was disappearing. The further north they all traveled. As the host of soldiers ceased and the tents were raised, the stars began to appear as the light of the sun disappeared beyond the horizon. With no moon out that night, there were more stars than possibly imaginable. The cold of the snow gave the light-riddled darkness a strange presence, one that was mystifying and marveling. With the fatigue of travel and spell of weariness befalling everyone, there was no time left in the day for a command meeting with a few of lords. So without any argument, all who could, went straight to sleep. But in the day that came, so did a small storm. It was no blizzard, but it was enough to prevent a continued journey north for at least another day. The delay was not the only problem, however. To keep the horses warm, the Dothraki and other soldiers surrendered their tents to their mounts to keep them warm. But those that did succumb to sickness. There wasn't enough maesters to tend to all, but some of the free folk had knowledge of medicinal treatments for the cold that were unheard of, but very effective. One of which was a drink stronger than any ale. It would heat up the body to combat against the cold. Daenerys was taken away to a private council with Tyrion, Jorah and Varys. So Jon desired to be in the company of his family. But unfortunately for him, they were all occupied elsewhere, be it practicing fighting or something else. Instead, he chose to oversee if everything was ready to resume for the march first thing the next day. He had Sam and Sir Davos join him on a walk through the camp, while they had no specific destination. But Jon wanted to look around to see the mood of the army. Ghost joined them as well, keeping close to Jon vigilantly. The three of them walked past many wagons and carts covers, with large fabrics to protect their cargo from the snow. "Has there been word from the wall yet on the construction?" Jon asked. "We received a raven this morning," Sam informed. "The weather up there is worse than it's been with us. We'll only have one trench dug, and the battlements for the archers posted outside the pass being made will only range half the length of it." "It'll be the best we get," Sir Davos said. "We already have the upper hand with our strategy. We just need to hope that the White Walkers accept the challenge and face us head-on." "Don't worry," Jon said, as they passed a large wagon that contained 10 ironwood helmets made for the giants. "They will." "Was there anything else in the raven, Sam?" "Yes," Sam replied in a sullen tone. There was an accident, and several of the builders died. What happened? Some ice on the west side of the wall broke from the top and fell near the inside of the passage. It crushed the men and there's hardly anything left to burn. Jon felt upset that such a thing happened, but there wasn't anything he could do, and nothing he can do about it now. We could hold a service of gratitude for them a day before we prepare for battle. Ser Davos suggested. I will do that. Jon agreed. They died working to help protect the world. They deserve a burial of some kind at least. Is there anything else the scroll said? No, Sam said. Just those. Not much relief was felt, with only a short message. Construction was behind and a living was already suffering losses before the battle even arrived. But they couldn't dwell on such things and had to accept what was available to them. What about inventory? We have the dragon glass, but there are over 100 Valyrian weapons in Westeros. Do we know how many are going to be used on the battlefield? The Maesters and I did a count, and we have 47 Valyrian steel swords, 12 axes, several daggers, 2 spears, and 3 of the Dothraki arcs. Sarama advised that the best fighters should be armed with the weapons. When the strength and speed of the White Walkers was explained, I even entrusted my family's sword to the Hound. Clegane? Davos inquired. I'd call you a fool to think he would return such a weapon if he was the same as he was before he left King's Landing. It'll be in much better hands than mine. I'll remain with the archers since I can't swing a sword very well, and most of the ones who brought their ancestral weapons are too old themselves to fight with them. Let's just hope none go missing before the battle, Davos said. A coward would only need one blade to run away and trade it for more gold than most houses have. To be honest, Jon wouldn't blame any who would run away from the dead. That's most that any could usually do when in the presence of such evil. Aye, Jon said. Let's hope that it doesn't. But if any try and get caught, I'll take their heads myself for desertion. The 3 men and direwolf came to a clearing where a few campfires were made, and soldiers gathered around. Some of them singing songs or just talking. Anything to brighten the mood. Jon turned to face Sam and Ser Davos. Sam, that's all I'll need from you today. Go be with Gilly, and enjoy your time together. Gladdy Jon, Sam pleasantly left to go find Gilly, who was among those treating the sick. While she joined the armies to serve as a healer and a cook for the armies, little Sam had to be left in Winterfell under the care of some of the old folk who aged too much to join the fight. Ser Davos, Jon said. I free you from the demand of my company if you desire to be elsewhere. Actually, my desire right now is to discuss something I haven't the chance to yet, since I've been busy working with Gendry and the other Stormlords. Of course, what troubles you? Ser Davos took the lead of the walk, and Jon followed next to him. I heard about the situation you had with Ser Grenn, regarding him disrespecting you. It wasn't me, it was my family. My brother and father died by traitors' hands, and I won't let others mock or joke about such things. I won't take heads, but I won't stand for it to go without consequence. That's perfectly fair, as is your right. However, I was actually referring to his blatant disrespect regarding you as king. He hasn't had a problem with it ever since. Bronn had returned to his usual attitude, days after his punishment, but he did show more courtesy to Jon and others. He hasn't, but you do. I heard that you told him you don't give a damn about the crown or the throne. You're only accepting one and pursuing the other because you need to. I couldn't care less about being the king of Westeros, so why is that a problem? May I speak freely, your grace? I welcome it. If you have no desire, then why should we follow you? You have the claim, and you're a far better choice than Cersei. But without a desire to be what we need, what's the point in swearing our fealty to you? He made a good point. Up until being crowned king at his wedding feast, Jon only did what he thought was right, because that was all the reason he needed. His people respected him for that and were loyal because of it. It doesn't matter right now. Fighting the dead does. Aye, they do, but how are we going to face them? Will Jon Snow lead us into battle, or Jon Targaryen, the king of Westeros? I used to have the desire to be a leader. I felt pride when I was elected the Lord Commander of the Watch, and even enjoyed the power I held for the time. But the pride and desire disappeared when I died. You got to experience betrayal on the side of the betrayed, Ser Davos reminded. A thing that many men suffer in their lives, but only a few are able to strive through it. I thought you did at first, when you came back and took Winterfell from the Boltons, but then you remained as you are now. A brooding man acting like the world in on his shoulders and his alone. It doesn't have to be. You can let others help you carry such a burden. I know I can. I can't help but be careful to not be reveling in my position. It's not that you're trying to be careful. It's that you're afraid to embrace what you are. You're afraid that people still see you as Jon Snow instead of Jon Targaryen. In all truth, Ser Davos wasn't wrong. Even after all of the things Jon has had to do and the things he has done for everyone, there were those like Bronn who saw him a bastard still. I've tried what I could. I've fought for the people time and time again, and I've died for them. I hate to say it, but having the will to die for your people isn't good enough. Maybe you should try living for your people and give them something to die for. I know it may sound selfish, but it might just make people actually want to fight for you, aside from with you. If the only reason you're king is because you need to be without any desire, then it doesn't show that you care much. The weight of Ser Davos' words carried a weight that Jon was familiar with as a man of the Watch. The memories of those who gave him guidance rang in Jon's mind. Do you want to lead these men? Jorah Mormont asked, demanding to let Jon express his desire. You'll find little joy in your command, but with luck you'll find the strength to do what needs to be done. Aemon Targaryen said, counseling Jon that some of the hard choices are the ones we must learn to take. You're one of the most honorable men alive, Ser Davos told Jon, but it's time you stop being a man and be a king. I don't know how to do that, Jon admitted. He could rule and commands, give counsel to the best of his abilities, and fight for his people, but he didn't know how to be a real king. Then it's a good thing you're married to someone who does. Maybe you should try asking her. Davos took his leave and left Jon alone with Ghost. Jon looked down to Ghost and saw curious eyes looking back at him. What do you think, boy? Jon asked his direwolf while brushing his hand over Ghost's head. Ghost took a few paces forward and stopped, looking back at Jon, waiting for him to follow. Jon decided to see where it was his direwolf wanted him to be, so he followed behind at a brisk pace. Many who were in Ghost's path of direction quickly got out of his way, looking terrified and cautious of what would happen if they didn't. When Jon would walk by the men, they would all give quick bows with their heads and break from their spell of fear. It didn't take long for Jon to find himself led to the entrance of Tyrion's tent. 2 Unsullied stood guard at the entrance, and didn't even flinch when Ghost struck right inside, paying them no heed. When Ghost's body entered halfway, Jon heard Tyrion yelp, presumably being surprised by Ghost's sudden entrance. Ghost backed out of the tent and sat next to Jon as sounds of laughter were heard. It wasn't a moment later that Daenerys and Tyrion walked out of the tent to see Jon and Ghost waiting patiently. Your Grace, Tyrion said. I must admit that I would appreciate it if your greetings weren't as surprising as this one. I won't make any promises. Tyrion sighed, disappointed that he might be subject to the mercy of a direwolf. I see. Is there something you need? I was hoping the Queen would be available by now. We're not entirely finished with our discussion, but I suppose we could use a break. He turned to face Daenerys. We'll resume in the evening. Thank you, Lord Tyrion. Daenerys said before Tyrion re-entered his tent. Is everything all right? Daenerys asked as she took Jon's arm and they walked away from Tyrion's tent. What were you talking about? It began his planning for the future of the country, if we win the wars to come. Anything worth mentioning? Since we're having to boys, he brought up the conflict about succession to the throne. He even dared to throw in the idea of the possibility that our sons would fight each other for the throne and go to war for it. Well, I did slap him when he said that. I refuse to believe in that horse shit about the gods flip a coin when Targaryens are born. But he did redeem himself with another idea. He thought about dividing Westeros in half at the neck. With the Walker dead, there will be more land to explore, and things to discover. The 2 kingdoms would be of an equal size to each other, and the North would get the independence it's always wanted. It's an idea, but with the majority of the lands beyond the wall being nothing but winter, there wouldn't be a proper equity between the kingdoms. Then I'll make sure you join us this evening, but enough of that. What was it you wanted to speak to me about? I had a talk with Divius just now. About what? Jon didn't answer at first. He didn't know where to begin. Is it odd to ask why you want to be queen? Not at all. But why are you asking? I suppose it's because I'm trying to find a reason to want to be king. Daenerys looked at him questionably, not from suspicion, but concern. I want to take back what is ours by right. Backform the usurpers who have sat on it since the Mad King and let the country fall apart. I became sick of everyone around me trying to make me their pawn to get the throne for themselves. I vowed to claim it. For my right was the only right. I was planning to bring our legacy to those who wronged me when I sailed back here, fire and blood. But then I met you. You reminded me why that I came here to be different than the ones who stole the throne from the Targaryens. And you gave me something to hope for, the future. I want to and will be queen so that I can give a better world to our children and for everyone who had to suffer in the mess that was made. Jon thought over her words. What began as a quest for vengeance turned into a quest for salvation, for Daenerys. But compared to him, she spent far longer seeking after these types of things for those who followed her. Jon only sought after survival for his men and people. Even that didn't give him desire to be king in the north. I can't say I don't want a better future for our children, Danae, but after the wars are fought and if we win, what do I do then? You'll be the king of Westeros. You can do as you please. I cannot tell you what you want to be as a king. Only you can. Jon tried to think if there actually was anything he wanted. I once told you that people follow you because they believe you make the impossible happen. I want to do that too. But what? We are the last chance our family has to transform into one of the greatest houses in the world, once again. What is it that you believe is stopping you? I can't when people look at me like I'm still a bastard. If you truly believe that you can't make the impossible happen like that, then I married a fool. It wasn't Aegon the Sixth of name who saved the wildlings from the White Walkers and let them south. It wasn't him who defeated the Boltons and restored order to the north, and it wasn't him who won my heart over. It was Jon Snow. If you could do those things as a bastard, imagine what you can do as a king. Kill the boy Jon Snow, and let the man be born. Kill the man, and let the king rise up. Jon let her words sink in, as he took a chance to think of what he could do, as a true king. He wasn't one to think highly of himself, but he indulged himself this once, and thought of the impossible things Arya Targaryen said he would do before going mad. Maybe Jon could actually do that. Jon halted their walk as they came to the edge of the camp. About a mile away was the river and foliage that grew on the banks of it. Thank you, Danae. I'll always be here for you when you need me. The two of them looked out to the view, just as the snow stopped falling. It's a beautiful sight. Jon looked down to Daenerys, and saw her in a beautiful bliss. Yes, it is. You'll The parade of soldiers, horses, and wagons marched smoothly through the freshly fallen snows of the storm that passed in the warmth of a winter morning. Despite the delay the army suffered, they could not make up for the loss of time in any way, according to the wildlings. Jaime kept to the middle of the army, and surrounded himself with those he knew wouldn't stab him in the back, given the chance. He may have surrendered himself to the Targaryens and received forgiveness in a sense, but not all were blessed with such a nature as they. He rode on his horse next to Bronn and Tyrion's. Behind them was Brienne and her squire Podrick Payne. Have you ever been to the Wall, Bronn? Tyrion asked. Once, when I was a young lad, Bronn told him. What brought you there? Podrick asked from behind. I got caught up in a brawl and got sentenced to serve the Black. Why am I not surprised you escaped your penalty? Jaime asked rhetorically. It's not an escape if no one chases you. Bronn informed. Lord Commander Cordile was nice and lazy during his command. Lost nearly 300 men during his time, and even more if you include the men sentenced to yet take the Black, myself included. Men like him were the reason the Watch declined over the years. Tyrion commented. It wasn't just the lazy ones who lost men, Bronn reminded. Jorah Mormont was one of the better ones, and he lost 300 on his great range. At least they died fighting what they were meant to in the first place, Brienne said. Aye, they did, but they died nonetheless. And I heard it wasn't a fight, even calling it a slaughter would be merciful. You knew nothing of the encounter the Night's Watch faced at the Fist of the First Men, only that 4 men who went on the Great Range made it back south of the Wall. Let's hope we're granted more mercy to at least have a battle, then. As those words left his mouth, they all came to the top of a hill and looked upon the wall. Jaime being the only one among them to not have seen it before. The size of it stretching from each end of the horizon gave it a majesty of power, unlike anything Jaime had seen before. But there wasn't as much as there could have been now that a giant gap was in it. There were many specks of men and giants with their mammoths all along the newly built parts. Such a shame, Tyrion said. I was looking forward to having a brew of the Night's Watch ale in their common room. They still make it, my lord, Podrick informed. I've had few in Wintertown with some of the brothers. It's not quite the same Podrick, but good enough. The army marched away from the wall, and towards the camp that was 4 miles south of it. As they got closer, the many factions of the army broke off to join each of their own. Despite his feeling to stay away from the men of the Westerlands, he had no choice but to oversee their arrival and settling as their commander and lord. It wasn't until late afternoon that Jaime had time to meet with the other commanders of the Westerlands. They all gathered around a map of the wall on a table inside Jaime's command tent, listening to Jaime's instructions that he received. 16 rows of shields and spears, one of the commanders said. I can't imagine anything breaking through that. The Night King has 3 times as many giants and mammoths as we do, and he has a dragon. Kainen informed. Our archers will be stationed on the eastern top of the wall alongside the Riverlands. We'll need them to ride to Oakenshield with the Dothraki and the Knights of the Vale at nightfall. Make sure each man takes 2 days' worth of provisions with them. The rest of our men will join the foot soldiers, ready to face anything that slips past our defenses. We only have a few hours, so get to work and make sure that every sword belt has a dragon glass weapon of any kind strapped to it. All of the commanders bowed their heads and exited the tent, leaving Jaime to himself. The Kemi took another look at the map, trying to spy anything that could possibly help in the near time before the battle. The suspense of the wait was torturing him inside. The army was just over a day's journey away, yet it felt like it would be much longer than that. A sudden breeze of cold air rushed behind him, signaling that someone had entered. He turned his head to the entry of the tent, and saw Brienne standing there. Lady Brienne, Serianae, or is it Lord Yene now? She asked. Until I return to Casterly Rock, I will remain a Ser. He didn't want to admit it, but he wanted to keep his title of Ser as long as he could before he would change from being a knight to a lord. Knights protected the innocent and defended the weak, while lords drank wine and did stupid things for stupid reasons. Is there something I can help you with? No, but I was on my way to enjoy a last drink with friends. I thought you would like to join us. Jaime looked back at the map, pondering over the idea. Perhaps taking a rest would be a good way to calm down and think straight. All right, I accept your offer. The two of them walked past the many tents to a clearing where many had set up tables and ale kegs around many pit fires. They weren't the only ones who had the idea to have a last drink. The king and queen themselves ordered all to take an afternoon's rest and enjoy the company of friends and family. Jaime didn't blame them. Most men who were drinking and laughing would soon be dead or raising a mug to mourn the fallen. Near the heart of everything, Jaime saw a table with 4 others standing around it. Chairs were in short supply and were all sent to the medical faction of the camp for the wounded that might be present after the battle. Around the table stood Bronn, Podrick, Tyrion and Tormund Giantsbane. Of all people, Tyrion was given a small box to raise his height enough that he could reach down to the table rather than over it. Ah, big brother, so good for you to join us. Tyrion slid a full mug of ale to him as he and Brienne both arrived. You hear anyone plot to kill you yet? Bronn asked. No. Should I be? Ah, damn it. Bronn tossed a small pouch filled with money of some small amount to Tyrion, who looked smug. You just cost me 5 gold dragons. You have dragons of gold? Tormund asked, with his brow raised. It's an amount of money, Brienne informed. You southerners and your money. Steel and food is the only thing the free folk use to trade. But you're in the south now, Bronn reminded, so you might want to get some yourself if you want to get anywhere but here. Tyrion picked up his mug and raised it above the center of the table. Here's to either a merry end or a new beginning. I'll drink to that. Bronn said as he and everyone else picked up their mugs and gently clashed them together before each taking a big swig. They were interrupted by a woman's yelp, and they all looked over to see a wildling man carrying a wildling woman over his shoulders and running through the crowds while the only ones cheering for them were other wildlings. What are they doing? Podrick asked. Haha. He's stealing himself a spearwife. Tormund bellowed cheerfully. What? Podrick looked more confused than he was. In the true north, if a man wants a wife, he has to steal her. If can do it without being caught or the woman resisting him enough, then she is his. Most of the time it's willingly. It looks like those two are going to have one last night together before we all march, or ours is off to die. Speaking of wives, where is yours? Tormund asked, looking at Bronn. Ted Din? She took a backhand to the face when she tried to steal the Stark girl's Valyrian dagger, but then the girl gave it to her anyway. I'm not surprised, Jaime said. Arya has the mood of a preying wolf, and most of those that came with Valyrian weapons are giving them to the best of the fighters here. Do any of you know if she's getting comfortable with the stagsmith? Tormund asked before taking another drink. Gendry. Podrick asked. I heard that they were friends, but I didn't think that much.
They're practically lovers without the love part or the fucking,
Bronn said, tilting his head to the side with his brow raised. But I bet if we win, they'll finally cut the horseshit and just get it over with. Nothing like a good fight to get one in the mood for a good fucking.
You got that right, Tormund said before subtly looking at Brienne while wearing a grin.
Jaime quickly looked over to Brienne, who immediately started to gulp down her ale, looking embarrassed. I promise you, the moment the battle is over, they'll be in each other's arms like they've just met after years of being apart. I doubt that, Tyrion said. When they first saw each other at Winterfell, she kept hitting him like any would to a brother. As far as Jaime knew, that was how many began before taking a journey to something far more physical. Arya. As the evening of the day drew near, the last of the construction on the barricade and pass were completed. Many of the soldiers in the Dothraki were readying their horses and themselves to ride out for Oakenshield and Queensgate. The dragons had arrived after the army as expected, and took to nesting far from the camp, mostly to be far from unwanted company. While the most of the Starks prepared for war in their own way, Rickon was inside Gendry's tent, who personally saw to his armor while Arya stood by. Hold still, Gendry said to Rickon, as he strapped on a small direwolf gorget around Rickon's neck. I'm trying, having never worn armor before. Rickon did not like the time it took for everything to be put on, or the weight of it. For him, the armor felt like 3 wet cloaks, and the steel pieces on his arms were like prisons. The gorget pinched the collar of his shirt to his neck, and the small collars around his elbows restricted his movements. How can men fight in this? I can promise you it will be a lot easier when you grow up to be one. Gendry finished strapping the gorget around Rickon's neck and spun the boy around to inspect the fit. Can you breathe all right? Aye, Rickon replied. Then my work is done. Gendry stepped back so he could view Rickon in his full attire. You look like the youngest knight I've ever seen. All you need is a helm to cover your face, and everyone will think you're just a tall dwarf knight. Can I take this off now? Rickon pleaded. Not yet. Walk around in it for at least an hour to really get used to how it moves. Make sure you run and jump around in it and practice some fighting. Rickon sighed as he swung his arms from side to side, loosening as much of the fit as he could. Gendry wiped his hands clean on a rag before turning to his own suit of armor. He made for himself that was resting on an armor stand. He had a steel breastplate, baldrons, greaves, and a great helm, with 2 stag antlers nested on each side of the helm's crown. The antlers were provided by none other than Rickon himself, salvaged from the mutilated stag he shot with Jonna and Ralph. If anything doesn't feel right, come see me and I'll do what I can. Gendry told him as he picked up a steel vambrace and began to adjust the straps. To Arya, all Rickon was missing was a beard, and he would look like their father, ready for war. You look amazing, little brother. The gorget looks just like the one that Jon used to wear. I just wish all of it wasn't so heavy, Rickon said. Be grateful for what you have, Arya told him. You'll be glad when it stops a sword from killing you. Regardless of her encouragement to Rickon, armor was never a guarantee to stop whatever weapons attacked it. Or an arrow, Rickon added, reminding everyone of his injury he took at the Battle of the Bastards. Arya felt a small bit of anger flare in her when he said that. She wished she could have been at the battle and killed Ramsay herself, but she had no idea who he even was, or that he even existed at the time. But if she did, the Bolton bastard and every soldier who was a part of the Red Wedding would have been on her list. Come one, Arya told him. Sansa and Bran are waiting for us. Rickon awkwardly walked over to her as she held the entrance of the tent. Before leaving herself, Arya looked over at Gendry. I'll see you tomorrow morning. With time growing short, she wanted to spend as much as she could be allowed to with those she held dear to her. Good night, milady, Gendry poked. Arya rolled her eyes and scoffed at him before she followed after her brother. When they arrived at the tent their brother and sister were housed in, Sansa looked delighted to see Rickon as he was while Bran seemed to try. Look at you, Sansa said, looking very proud at Rickon, a young soldier of the north. Rickon looked uncomfortable at Sansa's remarks. He was coming of the age where he didn't want to be seen as a boy anymore, but he had far more growing up to do before he could call himself a man. Robb wore the exact same thing when he went to war. Bran commented, "It was only a shame he didn't wear it when he went to weddings."
Is Jon on his way?
Arya asked. It was his idea to gather everyone together for the evening in the first place. "He's on his way with Theon," Bran informed.
The Theon's joining us?
Rickon asked. "Jon wanted a night for the children of Winterfell. He grew up with us just as we grew up with each other." Arya didn't like it. She didn't forgive Theon for what he did, but in the end far worse would have happened if he didn't. It wasn't long until Ghost popped inside the tent and shook a light layer of snow out of his fur. Everyone raised their arms in hopes to prevent incoming projectiles from getting on their bodies. Jon and Theon both entered after Ghost finished unloaded the snow from his body. The two of them shared a laugh together, as Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon wiped themselves clean of what hit them. "Good boy, Ghost," Jon said. The white direwolf laid down on the floor at Bran's feet, looking relaxed and content. "Rickon, you look ready to take on the Night King all by yourself." "If I was a few years older, I would," Rickon stated. "Is Daenerys joining us?" Sansa asked. "No, she's with Missandei and Ser Jorah, and a few others. Tonight, and tonight only, it's just us." Jon walked over to a small table that had a keg and 6 mugs, while he began to fill each mug with a warm drink. Theon took a seat in a chair while Arya and Sansa sat down on Jon's bed, and Rickon sat on the floor. "I heard your sister had her baby," Rickon announced to Theon. Theon nodded uncomfortably. "Yara had a baby girl. What's her name?" Sansa asked. "She didn't give her one. She said that she wants no love for her in any way. She said the baby is just a reminder of what Euron did to her." It sounded awful, but also understandable. The baby was a product of rape and incest, 2 things that can scar the heart more than the body.
"I'm sorry," Rickon said. "I didn't mean to pry like that."
The Septon shook his head at him. "It's all right. The baby girl is staying with my son on the Iron Islands. She'll be in good hands." Jon began to hand out drinks to everyone. "You spoke to her then?" Jon must have been referring to the mother of Theon's son. "Her name's Bella. I spoke with her twice before I was allowed to speak to Small Theon, I call him." He turned his head to look at Jon. "He reminds me a lot, Robb. More than myself. He'll be nice to Yara's daughter, a brother more than a cousin." Theon looked on the verge of trembling. He didn't look sad or scared, but instead confused. "I'm sorry for everything. I am. Even if it means nothing to hear it, I have to say it." "It doesn't mean nothing," Arya told him. "We can't change the past. As much as we wish we could, we can't. But we can remember it to make a better future." Jon raised his mug to the air. "Here's to future. May it be better than what we've been given." Everyone raised their mugs with Jon and took their first drink. Rickon spat his out and began coughing hard, making everyone laugh at his first taste of ale. "Shut up," Rickon exclaimed. "It went in wrong. The opportunity was too good for Arya to let it pass. I bet that's what Theon's first visit to a brothel was like. The only ones who got a laugh out of that were her, Jon, and Theon." "Arya," Sansa shouted, while failing to resist a smile. Rickon just looked confused and didn't understand what the joke meant, while Bran wore a fake smile. The evening for the Starks was spent drinking and being merry. No one would have argued against spending their time like this, instead of preparing for the battle. They needed this, for it could be the last time they were all together. After an entire mug of ale, Jon began to recall the time he and Robb tried to scare Sansa, Arya, and Bran in the crypts. "I poured the flour all over my body," Jon explained while trying to contain his laughter, "and waited behind grandfather's statue for Robb to bring you 3. When I saw the light of lantern, I jumped out screaming as loud as I could." "I remember what happened after that," Arya chuckled. "Sansa started screaming louder than you, and Robb couldn't laugh because Bran started crying. And you ran as fast as you could to father," Bran said. Arya didn't know whether or not she had too much to drink, or if she had a bad memory because she didn't remember that happening at all. "Are you sure? You were only 2 years old." "You're asking someone who can see every event of time at will, if they remember something correctly." Arya became dumbfounded when she realized what she just did. "I'm joking, Arya." Bran started to lightly laugh at her, and it surprised everyone. "You told a joke?" Sansa asked. "I did," Bran confirmed. Arya wasn't the only one to be overjoyed at this. Bran had been nothing but emotionless for months, but now he was starting to seem like their brother again instead of a magic all-seeing cripple. "It's getting late," Jon declared as he set his mug on the table. "We have a lot to do tomorrow, so get to bed soon." Even though he was deep into his ale, he kept a fatherly composure for all of them. "No argument there." Arya agreed, feeling the weight of her eyelids starting to grow. She placed her mug next to Jon's and retrieved her cloak from Jon's bed. "Good night, everyone." While she walked past many tents and guards on patrol, Arya had time to gather her thoughts and shake away any drunk feelings she could. She wrapped her cloak around her body and trapped a small bit of warmth to her body as she thought about what the battle would be like. Arya remembered growing up and reading stories about great wars and conquering heroes. But being in the center of a great massacre changed her entire view on such things. All of the glory and victory that the stories of old had, those were things that happened after the wars and battles. The only thing true about every battle in history was that there was death. What differentiated the battles was the kind of death there was. "There is only one thing we say to death." The voice of Syrio Foral rang through Arya's mind. "Not today," she whispered to herself. Arya wished she could have learned more from Syrio. Her skill was great, but not good enough if the Hound told her that her duel with Jon was nothing but pity. That was when she made a personal vow to herself. After the war, she would have a real fight with him. Daenerys, having finished a well-deserved get-together with those Daenerys held close in her heart, she was escorted back to her tent by Grey Worm and 2 other Unsullied. She didn't ask for him specifically, but he took it upon himself to see to her safely. Walked through the camp. "Did you enjoy the wine, Grey Worm?" Daenerys asked. "No, wine tastes bitter when I drink it, and it makes my senses feel strange. A poor drink before a battle." Daenerys was a bit envious of him. She hadn't had a single glass ever since she learned she was pregnant, but she was beginning to have cravings for it. But with the help of Missandei and her other friend, she found ways to suppress it. Sarah Jorah once told me a tale of a drunken red priest who fought at the siege of the Iron Islands with a flaming sword and woke up the next day wondering how he became part of a battle. The red priests and followers of the Lord of Light are granted fire magic in exchange for their blood, Grey Worm informed. Many men run away when they see a sword burst into flames. And many more men run away when they see a dragon. Grey Worm looked agreeing with her as they arrived at her tent. "Maester, could I ask for a gift?" This was the first time Daenerys ever heard Grey Worm ask her for a gift. "What kind of gift?" "When the wars are over and the throne yours, I want to sail to the Summer Isles and Nath with Lady Missandei, to have a time that we can be ourselves instead of what the Maesters made us into." Daenerys wasn't surprised at all when Grey Worm asked her. To give someone a chance to be something instead of a soldier wasn't unreasonable at all. Daenerys gave Grey Worm a very comforting smile. "For all you have done for me, such a request can easily be granted." She would grant that kind of wish to all the former slaves if they desired. Grey Worm was just the first one to be direct about it. "You are kind, Misa. Now go, I believe I am keeping you from another beauty." Daenerys didn't want to let Missandei be delayed for many things. Grey Worm bowed his head and left his queen at the entrance of Jon's tent. Before Daenerys entered, she took a last look at the stars and took notice at their simple beauty. People see them every night of their lives, but it's only when they take a moment to really look at them that they see that they have a divine feeling about them. Inside the tent, Jon had already dressed into his night clothes and was sitting down in a chair with a cloth in one hand and long claw in the other. He ran the cloth up and down the blade, cleaning any bit of dirt or pollutant that might be in the blade.
"Feeling nervous?"
Daenerys poked. "Not as much as before our wedding," he told her. She couldn't help but feel the same way. She began to change out of her cloak and gown as Jon sheathed Longclaw back into its scabbard and grabbed her nightgown, ready to assist her. "Then tell me how I can ease my husband's mind. I want him to rest peacefully with me this night." "Well, if you want to do that, then we wouldn't be doing much resting at all." Jon looked at her hesitantly before she grabbed hold of his body and started to kiss him. Daenerys forced on to drop her nightgown as she slowly walked them to their bed. "Take off your clothes," she spoke slowly. "As my queen commands." The light of the lanterns within the king and queen's tent began to glow dim as the night pressed on. Jon and Daenerys laid together under their heavy fur blankets, receiving more warmth from each other than the furs. Daenerys let her thoughts drift to whatever they desired, as she perched her head on her pillow. She began to think about the Night King and the White Walkers and how they came from the lands of always winter. She didn't know much about that place or the legends of the North, for that matter. What do you think is beyond the edge of the North? Daenerys quietly asked. Probably more snow, Jon quipped. I'm being serious. What do you think is beyond the world that we know? The farthest I've ever been north was the Frostfangs. From what I saw there was nothing but snow, ice, and mountains. I can't think of what else is out there, but I do remember I had a dream, not long ago, about a mountain. It was where the Night King was hiding for the past 8,000 years. Hiding? Daenerys didn't understand what he meant when he said that. The White Walkers were never defeated in the first war against them, only driven back. I think that's why it's always been winter beyond the wall. If we win, those lands may yet see spring once again. If we win, I want you to take me somewhere north. I want to see what lands without castle look like. I know of a nice cave I can show you, Jon told her. Daenerys didn't look at him, but Hez could feel Jon smiling. Tell me more of the lands. It seemed to Daenerys that the place that has been cut off from the world had the most mysticism about it, that drew her attention. What do you think the northern edge of Westeros is like? Jon didn't answer immediately. It felt like he was in deep thought about it. When I was a boy, I caught the pox and was bedridden for a few days. This came out of nowhere, but Daenerys listened all the same. On the worst night, I couldn't sleep at all, but I couldn't stay awake at the same time. I was caught somewhere in between, but I could still dream. I remember everything I saw in my mind. I was standing on a beach, the sands were silver, and the smell of the sea was a scent that was sweet. The sun set a gold I never thought existed, but when the light of day was gone, I saw something I longed to see in my dreams, once again. Daenerys became entranced by Jon's memory, her mind begging her to know what Jon... See what? A moonless night, and a sky filled with an uncountable number of stars and clouds of light. A dark sky that was brighter than the sun could ever hope to be. I thought I was looking at heavens themselves. Daenerys couldn't imagine what such a place looked like, but she longed to see that place herself after hearing it. Maybe you were, or maybe they were looking at you. The light of the lanterns completely disappeared, leaving the two of them in total darkness. Maybe. The two of them fell into a deep sleep that they both hoped wouldn't end, so long as they were with each other. Daenerys began to feel her mind take her from a void of nothing to her dreams, and the power of her child Matthias began to share her desire to know the place his father spoke of. Daenerys found herself sitting down on Silver Beach, dressed in a moon-white dress that was softer than any silk she ever wore. The fabric flowed like water when caught in the breeze. The sand looked cold, but was warm to the touch. Curled up next to her was a small black wolf pup and a silver dragon, fresh from being hatched. The three of them looked out to the sky and saw more than what Jon had described to them. Trails of small light streaked across the sky, and the cosmic light looked like it was bursting from the shadows of night beyond the stars. It's beautiful, Daenerys unconsciously spoke. Instantly after she said that, the warmth of the sand disappeared, and the air grew cold. Daenerys could see her breath beginning to freeze, and the light of the sky fading away. The baby dragon and wolf pups crawled onto her lap and felt terrified. Daenerys shot awake and felt a shivering breeze enter the tent. She sat up and looked at falling snow start to leak into the tent with the light of morning. Jon woke up after her and placed his arms around her for comfort. Are you all right? Before she could give her answer, they both heard the sound of a horn blasting. There was a small pause before a second blast was made, but after that, there was nothing. 2 blasts, Daenerys said. They're on the horizon. Jon. The afternoon came fast, and there wasn't a single person bustling about doing something to prepare for the army of the dead. Only 1 in 10 people seen wasn't yet dressed in their armor, and everything was loud with the shouts of orders and commands. Jon was in his command tent with Howland Reed, Bran, Jaime Lannister, and 2 other commanders who were in the place of Edmure and Tormund. They were all overlooking a map of the wall, and the lands north of it. Howland traced his finger to a location about 30 miles away from where Castle Black once stood. The wargs are keeping watch on the army, and report that they are moving at a slow pace. They'll arrive at the wall late in the night. What about the Night King? Jon asked. Have they seen him or the dragon? He's not with the army, Bran informed. He's preparing himself for the battle. What does that mean? Jon asked. Right now, he's in the cave of the Three-Eyed Raven, He's just staring at the corpse of the one before me. Bran gazed to the empty space in front of him for a few moments before jostling around. He didn't want me watching him. As long as we know where he is, Jon said. We don't want him to flying around us and attacking from behind. Jon looked up from the map to the men in the tent. I want the army to march to the wall in 2 hours. When the army reaches the haunted forest, I want ravens sent to Queen's Gate and Onconshield. Everyone must be in formation and ready for battle. The men with him nodded in unison before dismissing themselves to pass along the orders. The time was drawing closer, and Jon himself had to prepare. Back in his tent, a young northern lad waited patiently for the king to return to help him put on his armor. The pieces were strapped on one by one, and the fit was perfect. This was the first time Jon had ever worn all of the pieces besides the gorget. The feeling of the armor felt more protective than what he wore when he fought against the Bolton army. As the last pauldron was secured to Jon's arm in the gorget, Daenerys walked inside. The young lad bowed his head to his queen before finishing his work and leaving. You look marvelous, Daenerys commented. It would make me feel better if you wore some, Jon told her. That won't be happening as long as I have 2 children inside of me. Jon had no regrets about their miracle, but a part of him did wish that it didn't happen until after the fighting was done. Regardless, the only thing he wanted was Daenerys to be safe. He walked up to Head and gently embraced his wife, taking every moment he could to make for just them. We will win this war, Daenerys assured him. But will we survive it? I know in my heart we will. Jon let go of Daenerys and took a lasting gaze into her enchanting eyes, remembering the moment he fell for her. That's all I needed to hear. Jon retrieved Longclaw from leaning up against a table and strapped the sword belt around his waist before putting on his cloak. As he left his tent with Daenerys next to him, his thoughts began to ponder around where he was and what he was doing. So long it has been since that day he left Winterfell, the day he truly started his journey that led to him going to war against the White Walkers and becoming a king. But now he was going to face them. Finally, after all the pain lost to the Night King and his army, it was near time to settle the score. The 2 of them joined Jon's siblings and Ser Jorah. Together, all of them gathered would meet one last time before separating with their respective factions of war. Arya, dressed in light armor over her regular clothes, would be part of the reserves behind the infantry, since she couldn't use a bow or a spear, just blackfire. Sansa would join the Maester and others who would be tending to wounded afterwards. Rickon and Ser Jorah will be joining the archers at the front, but after the retreat, Ser Jorah made a promise to protect Rickon. Bran, being unable to fight with weapons, would be safely far from the battle, but he would be guiding Nymeria and her pack to the battle when the fighting will break out. So this is it, Ser Jorah said. This could very well be the last time any one of us sees the other. It could be, Jon said. That's I order every one of you not to die. Only if you promise not to either, Arya said. Jon wouldn't allow himself to. He's done it one time more than anyone should. I promise. Arya, after many hugs and holding back tears of fear, Arya left to go join the Northerners among 50,000 others and get organized. But before she did, there was one more person she had to speak to. Gendry was outside of his tent dressed in his armor save for the helm. He looked like a true knight, the kind every boy dreams of being and every girl dreams of being rescued by. Over his armor was a yellow and black surcoat with his sigil. He was talking with Beric Dondarrion, who was given a set of the armor the Fiery Hand wore. Beric noticed Arya's presence and cut his time short, leaving Gendry alone. He did something right for once, Arya thought to herself. Gendry noticed her and looked very pleased that she came to see him. I thought you would have joined the Northern Army by now, Gendry told her. And I thought you knew me better than to guess such a thing. Of course I had to see you before we go to war. Arya couldn't let herself skip a moment together with him. They had been through too much together to waste a chance, as this. But unfortunately for her, she didn't know what to say.
Arya, Gendry said. If I don't make it.
Don't you dare say another word like that. If tell yourself you can't, then you won't be able to. It was then Arya could pass along one of the best lessons she ever learned. If find yourself in front of death, do what you tell him. Gendry shrugged his shoulders. Piss off? Arya smiled amusingly that Gendry could make a joke at a time like this. It was one of the things she loved about him. Not today. Then how about we make a promise? What kind? Arya asked curiously. If we both make survive, Hotapai gets to come with me to Storm's End, and so do you. Arya felt a knot in her stomach form when he said that. And what would I do in Storm's End? Would I be your lady? Gendry smiled at her. You wouldn't be my lady, you'd be my family. He turned her words against her. Before she could say anything back to him, Gendry walked away to join Beric, leaving Arya alone and without an answer. She watched him disappear as another friend walked up next to her. I feel sick watching the two of you, Sandor said. Arya didn't even look at him when she replied. Then maybe you shouldn't watch. Sandor heavily sighed and rolled his eyes. I am only ever going to say something like this once. Just because a woman is a lady of a castle or some other fucking thing, it doesn't mean she's a dress-wearing damsel her whole life. Arya turned her head to look at Sandor, not believing that he was actually talking to her about that. You can choose what kind of person you get to be, and is really as bad as you're making it. Ladies have power, families, and a place to call home. So stop bitching and think about it before you regret it. Arya never did think about it that way before. The only thing she didn't want to be was what Sansa was before they left Winterfell. But thinking about how different she was now gave her a new look at it. Sansa, not a word, or I break your bloody legs. Arya didn't know how to respond to that. She knew that he probably would, but felt like he didn't mean it. Can I ask you something? One question then, no more. One question was all she needed. Why are you telling me this? For a rare moment, Sandor didn't look angry, because I'd rather be a lord than a hound who leaves a trail of bodies wherever he goes. Before Arya could speak, Sandor cut her off. I said no more. Now are you coming with me or not? Arya took a long look at him and could see something more than she let herself see before. She gently nodded and walked with him on their way to join the northern host and to prepare for war. As they did, Arya made a mental note that the next time she saw Gendry, she would give him his answer. Drawn. Ghost joined Jon and Daenerys as they prepared to mount their dragons. But seeing that he couldn't ride along, Jon knelt down to his direwolf and gave him a scratch behind his ears. Sorry, boy, Jon said, but you can't come with me. I need you to do something else instead. Ghost perched his ears up, waiting for Jon's order. Go find Bran and keep him safe. The moment Jon's hand left contact with Ghost's fur, the white direwolf sprinted away back to the camp. Daenerys walked next to Jon and watched with him as Ghost disappeared in the color of the snow. Are you ready? We're about to face an army of dead soldiers. If we win, we have another war to fight. If we lose, I don't think anyone is ready. Jon turned to Daenerys and grabbed hold of her hands, intertwining her fingers with his. I won't tell you what to do if I die or make any promises. All I can say is I love you, Dany. I love you more than anyone I've known. Daenerys held back her tears as she planted a light kiss to Jon. And I love you, Jon. No matter what you are, a bastard of Winterfell, or my husband and king, from this day until the end of my days. Jon gave her one last kiss, putting every emotion he could into it before letting go of her hands. He turned away and walked up to Rhaegal, mounting him and ready to fly. The dragons had grown considerably since the first nested in the north. Ygritte and Lyris were nearly as big as Rhaegal and Viserion were when Jon first set foot on Dragonstone. Rhaegal, however, was just as big as Rhaegal was that same time. But Rhaegal was far larger than all of them, his head almost the size of a carriage, making him almost the size of Belagorion the Dread. Jon looked at Daenerys once more, praying to any god who could hear him to not let this be the last time they see each other. Come on, Rhaegal, let's go. The large green dragon jostled around a bit before getting a running start and spreading his wings. The Gris followed closely behind as the two dragons took off from the ground and into the sky. They flew higher than the wall and circled around the gap that was made, giving them a clear view of the battleground. The ice that had collapsed was mostly cleared away on the north side, and the scythe was such a weight that it couldn't be moved, so it was left where it fell, not 100 yards from the rebuilt wall. On the battlements on top and on the bottom, thousands of archers waited for the enemy to arrive at their doorstep. Jon took this moment to let himself be heard by those who would fight for him. His bond with Rhaegal had grown strong enough that the magic that gave Valyrians the power to ride and control dragons let him mentally speak his guidance to his dragon. Rhaegal swooped down and landed in between the infantry wall and the foot soldiers, Ygritte landing shortly after. There was no way the entire army would be able to hear him, but he would make sure many would. Look around you all. You stand with men from every corner of this country, every corner of this world. But tonight, you fight as one army, against one enemy. Those creatures from hell come to take this world from you. You will not let them. We will show them that we are the hell they fear. We will show them that we are greatest army that has ever been. The sound of a horn blast echoed throughout the land with a weight that felt like it was heard across the world. Tonight is the night we will win. A second horn blasted, sounded shortly after the first. Tonight is the night we finish what our ancestors started. The third and final horn blast sounded, like an echo that begins an avalanche. They think we're afraid of them, so let's let them hear it. Rhaegal and Ygritte both let out mighty roars as Jon raised his fist into the air, and every soldier, whether they heard or not, yelled mighty battle cries that would shake mountains. The calm was gone, and now began the storm. Rickon. The sound of the horn blasts gave way to a dread, settling doubt in the minds of all that heard it. The sight of blue eyes looked like stars emerging from the shadows of the haunted forest. The light they gave poisoned the body with fear. In the distance, lands beyond the wall, a great snowstorm that swallowed the mountains from sight was nearing the edge of the trees. The winds they blew through the gap of the wall had been traveling northbound for days, but a sudden change turned them south, and a cold far greater than any felt before came with it. On the battlements made of ice, wood, and steel, 5,000 archers stood side by side, forming 2 rows from one end to the other, all ready with their bows and 5 arrows in hand. In the first row, for every grown, seasoned archer were 4 children. In the second row, as well as 15 feet below on the ground, were another 5,000 archers, all grown and skilled. Behind them on the secondary battlements were only 2,000, but armed and ready. Rickon stood at the dead center of the front lines, watching with everyone else as the army of the dead walked closer. Even while wearing thick clothes under his armor and his winter cloak, Rickon could still feel his hands shivering, but he felt it was from fear more than the cold. He was far more afraid of what brought the storm than the storm itself. To Rickon's left was Ser Jorah, with a bow and snow at his sword belt. On his right was Janna, looking just as scared as he was. Behind both of them was Angwai, who would be calling out the commands when the time came. As Rickon tightened his grip on bow, he felt a hand placed on his shoulder from behind him. "Are you afraid?" Angwai asked. Without looking at him, Rickon nodded. A blast of cold air rushed past him, and everyone around him. It didn't feel like a question since it was obvious, but more like something Angwai wanted to know for certain. "Good. It's far better than being stupid." Confused, Rickon and Janna both turned to look at Angwai. Questioningly, he shook his head then, as if the reason for what he said was obvious. "If you don't let yourself be afraid, then you can't learn to be brave." He patted Rickon on the shoulder and returned to looking forward. Hearing those words didn't calm Rickon, but they did bring a small bit of comfort to him. But deep down he wanted to run from the battle. He was just over 12 and about to fight in a war. He could even tell he wasn't the only child who wanted to run, or only person for that matter. He didn't care about being brave. He wanted to be safe and away from all of this. But then he remembered being Ramsay's prisoner and running from arrows at the Battle of the Bastards. All he ever did since all of this started was run from everything. Ramsay, the Night King, the bear. He shook the thoughts from his head, trying to remove any doubt lingering among them. From behind, the sounds of the dragons roaring and battle cries of the army could be heard, echoing all the way from the source to beyond the wall. Without question, Angwai, Ser Jorah, and all of the other adults raised their fists into the air and let out their own calls of battle. Maybe something like that would give Rickon something to help face the dead. He and many of the other children joined the army shouting. Doing such a thing brought the feeling of victory before the battle even begun. Hundreds of yards away, the army of the dead halted and became still. The shouting died down and all was silent, save for the winds of winter. The silence felt like the kind that one who is guilty has before admitting his crime, out of shame. At the front lines of the dead were the White Walkers, more than 30 of them, all riding on their undead horses. The light of their eyes shined more prominently than that of their soldiers. One of them raised his spear of ice and let out a cry, a kind that carried a weight that crawled up the wall and right over to the south. The noise was followed by the army of the dead's own battle cry before foot soldiers began to charge forward at a wild speed. Rickon was not the only one who began to breathe nervously as light vibrations could be felt coming from over 200,000 dead men running to kill them all. In between both armies were small markers marking distances that were in range of the archers. The only cover the dead would have against such attacks was the giant scythe that was out in the open. "Listen up," Aenge shouted, gaining the attention of all who could hear him. "If I see a single arrow miss, then I'll make sure whoever shot it is left behind." At this point, the army of the dead passed the furthest marker. Knock! Rickon grabbed one of his dragonglass arrows and knocked it on his bowstring, letting out a deep breath and searching for the target he knew would be his. All of the other archers on the battlements followed suit. Drop! Raising the bow up high, Rickon kept his eyes on the path the arrow would take to find its mark. Now, the battle truly began. Loose! Thousands of arrows were shot high into the sky and arched beautifully before taking their fall to meet that which they would kill. As the arrows fell, the shimmer of the dragonglass emitted a shine that made all of them look like a rain of dark stars streaking across a darkened white sky. Within seconds, the arrows sinked to the ground and hundreds upon hundreds of blue-eyed soldiers collapsed to the ground and became motionless. Only a couple dozen continued onward. "I thought I told you not to fucking miss," Aenge shouted before the second volley would begin. At this point, new soldiers took the place where many had fallen and closed the distance between them and the battlements. Aenge put his fingers in his mouth and gave a loud whistle that was repeated by many others, signaling the archers on the ground to join the next volley. Knock! Grabbing the second arrow felt less terrifying than grabbing the first did. Drew! Gazing out to the dead, there were too many to find just one to hit. Loose! The volley from the ground whistled by, bringing a small gust of wind with each arrow. A second rain of dark stars rushed down to the ground, and all that escaped the first volley was struck down, and many more behind. As the army of the dead continued to advance, Rickon noticed a small group of about 20 moving slowly with their shields raised up high, protecting everything underneath from being hit. Whatever it was they were protecting, the group wasn't heading for the wall, but the giant scythe in the field. Behind them were two giants, both dragging a large tree, freshly torn from the ground with them, using the thick branches to keep the arrows from hitting them. When the small grouping of shields reached the head of the scythe, they parted and unveiled 3 of the White Walkers. Far enough that Rickon could see, the White Walkers placed their hands on the cold steel head of the scythe. Knock! Aenge called out the order, but Rickon didn't follow it, since he couldn't shake a feeling he had. He remembered what happened when the Night King touched his sword. It shattered. But the scythe didn't when the White Walkers did. The 2 giants that followed dropped the tree off to the side and raised 2 large clubs they had above them, ready to swing at the scythe. Rickon held his breath as the giants swung their clubs at the head, and the steel shattered like glass. "Get down," Rickon shouted. Instinctively, he reached out for Jonna and Ser Jorah, and tugged them down with him, and he ducked to his feet. Only a few heard him, and ducked in time before dozens of steel shards whizzed by. Most of the pieces hit the walls of ice, but many found their way above and hit the archers. A few of them were struck and fell backwards and off of the battlements, while some of the children around them merely collapsed and their blood began to stain the ice. Rickon looked around and noticed that Angli was no longer behind him, but on the ground below him, bleeding heavily from his neck and face, remaining motionless. At least for a moment he didn't move. Then his body squirmed and his eyes turned blue. But before anything could happen, Ser Jorah shot a dragonglass arrow into Angli's body, returning him to a dead state. "Check the wounded," Ser Jorah shouted as he drew a dragonglass dagger and looked at the bodies that fell. Many of the ones that had rose back up but were quickly put back down with the magic of the dragonglass. Rickon looked to Jonna and checked to see if she had been hit. "Are you all right?" he asked. Jonna rapidly nodded at him, showing no signs of injury. Glad she wasn't hurt, Rickon slowly rose up and looked over the battlements to see if the giants were preparing for another attack like that. But while the first one happened, the third volley had been released. With the attack made by the dead, a small section was free of arrows, and the dead broke past the mark of retreat. Luckily, the arrows found their way to the 2 giants, and both were lying dead in the snow by the scythe, but the White Walkers remained unharmed. "We need to sound the retreat," Rickon shouted to any who could hear him. "Rickon," Ser Jorah called as he picked up the body of a young girl who was bleeding at her left arm. But not just any girl. It was Lady Lyanna Mormont. She was passed out, and Sarajora looked distraught. "Let's go." Rickon and Jonna both followed him quickly down the wooden steps of the battlements, being careful to not trip and fall. When they got to the ground, the archers in the second line of battlements, and on the ground, knocked their arrows for another volley. It was up to them now. Sam! The deaths on the front lines was not expected. From all of the experience that anyone had with the dead that Sam knew of, they weren't keen on using ranged weapons. The sight of those that fell of the battlements and the children whose bodies were left during the retreat weighed on Sam's heart. He had been in enough battles to stomach death, but the sight of the children made him sad. Only a few survived that vicious attack and were carried away. Only a dozen men remained on the front battlements to act as spotters to call out the orders for the archers. Each of them carried a red flag to wave, signaling for the volleys to prepare. Even as Sam knocked his first arrow, many could be seen raining down from up high on the east and west side of the wall. "Are you ready for this, Sam the Slayer?" Ed jokingly asked as the two of them waited for the command to draw. If only the dead died by reading books, you could take them on single-handedly. Given the circumstances, a conversation was not the right thing to be having. But given what was happening, a conversation was the only way to keep things calm and focus on the task at hand, rather than the fear. Sam rolled his eyes as the two of them and the rest of the archers drew their bowstrings back and then released their arrows. If only his father and brother were alive to see him right now. The two of them had looked down upon him for being a fat reader instead of a strong hunter. But now Sam was a brother of the Night's Watch, defending the realms of men from the greatest enemy while all they did was hunt and play at war. The arrows sailed high into the sky and then disappeared in front of the battlements, and what lied beyond them. Without warning, two of the flag bearers ducked behind cover, but one of them was struck by a spear and thrown off the battlements, and to the ground. The spearhead buried itself in the snow, and the body slowly slid down the shaft before starting to thrash, and the eyes turning blue. Someone quickly shot an arrow into the body and released it from the magic of the Night King. "If they're in range to throw spears," Sam said. "Then it's time to go," Ed confirmed, before pulling a horn he had at his side to his lips and blowing loudly. The ground forces were to retreat first, and then the rest. One more volley, and then we get the fuck of here. The remaining flag bearers retreated off the wall and joined the retreating ground forces, while the last line of archers knocked their arrows and drew them back for one last volley. By the time the arrows were released, there were loud crashes sounding at the front wall. Sections of ice began to move repeatedly as if they were being smashed with a battering ram or a giant. This started a small panic among some of the men on the ground, and they began to run as fast as they could, afraid of what would come through. "And now it's our turn to run away," Ed said before blowing another blast from his horn, signaling the last line to retreat. The battlements began to empty, and by the time Sam and Ed got to the ground, some of the dead soldiers were beginning to climb over the front wall, but only a few at a time. "Run!" Ed grabbed onto Sam by his shoulder and pushed behind him to go faster. Sam wasn't one for running, but he would let himself fall behind, like he did at the Fist of the First Men. As the two of them neared the bridge, men began to push forward to cross like a herd of animals. The dead were climbing over the front wall in dozens. But it wasn't long until two white giants crashed through a section, and the dead spilled through like water rushing past a collapsing dam. The fear of the oncoming horde tightened around Sam's mind by the time he was on the bridge, even though almost everyone was across. Even when he got to the other side, the feeling didn't disappear. "Light the pitch," someone shouted just moments before a blast of heat erupted from behind all of the fleeing soldiers. The trench and the bridges became filled with fire that transformed into a protective barrier, though one that would only last for a few minutes. Already Sam was exhausted from running, but he refused to let himself give in. His efforts would be nothing compared to the rest of the battle. But his fight was done. He would not be able to wield a sword or a spear, but he could be of use at the camps to heal others when the bodies begin to pile up. The infantry parted ways for the retreating archers to make it through to the open south. When the last man passed the lines, the infantry quickly closed off any way past them. Once the fires in the trench were gone, the only thing in the way of the dead would be a wall of spears, shields, and some of the fiercest men the living had to offer. Grey Worm. As the fires of the trench continued to burn, the number of glowing blue eyes began to grow behind them. The archers high on the west and east sides of the wall continued to bombard the ground with dragon glass arrows, while the archers outside the walls of the passage waited for the fire to die and the dead to advance. The Unsullied were no strangers to war, but the battle like this would only be granted to a few in the world's existence. Grey Worm stood in the third row of the front lines. He and everyone else who stood around him were ready and waiting for dead to crash into them. Behind him he could feel the fear of the Westerosi men, but not from the Unsullied. They knew no fear, not of pain, death, or the demons that have come for them. But out of the 6,000 Unsullied, one of them was afraid he might not miss Undai again, or that she might not see him again. No, he had to stand his ground and face this. If he could, nothing would ever make him afraid of those things again. Grey Worm began to tap his spear rhythmically into the snow. His actions were repeated by his brothers in arms and the Westerosi men. Soon what was a faint tapping became a loud stomp, followed by spears being banged against shields. The noise of war brought the fury of battle to one side and intimidation to the other. In the center of the wall of fire, the flames were extinguished, revealing 3 of the soldiers with skin of ice and the eyes bluer than their soldiers. This was the first time any of them had seen a White Walker, and the first time any of them felt a cold that was evil in nature. Being in the center of their army, the White Walkers remained protected by their soldiers and out of range from any projectiles. The rest of the fires disappeared, and the dead resumed their march forward. Although what started as a march turned into running like wild animals. Septon Zibia, Grey Worm ordered. The sound of thousands of heavy shields planting into the snow thundered the ground and the barricade was made. Urias. Every soldier lowered their dragon glass spears in front of the line of shields and a few feet above to combat anything that attempted to climb over. Grey Worm could feel the ground begin to tremble like a small earthquake as the dead drew closer. But the noise was soon overshadowed by the sound of his heartbeat banging in his ears like a loud drum. He breathed deeply to try and calm his senses, but keeping his absolute focus on the dead charging forward. The archers of the east and west sides of the pass began to unleash their volleys. But even with so many arrows, the dead didn't seem to thin out one bit. Everything went completely silent for a brief instant, before thousands of dead soldiers crashed into spears and shields, making a noise like a loud explosion. The force of the impact even made Grey Worm shift in his position before he pressed his weight forward. The dead were desperately trying to break through, but to no avail. Though most of the dead men were decayed and rotting away with very little flesh on them, and their strength was greater than a living man's. The Unsullied and Westerosi infantry began their thrusts with their spears at the dead. Every time Grey pushed forward into an enemy, he could feel something trying to pull him forward. It took all of his strength to keep his grip on his spear, and not let something take it from him. The infantry continued to hold their ground as volleys of arrows began to fire from behind and over them. But no matter how many arrows dived into the dead continued with all their strength. It wouldn't be long until the catapults would begin flinging jars of pitch into the fray and fire arrows shooting to light them. All focus shifted as Unsullied in the front lines were pulled forward out of line and killed. For those around them quickly blocked off any openings. But the time it took was too long, and the dead began attempting to break through. The dead began slashing their broken weapons at whatever they could like rabid animals, letting out an agonizing screech as they did. About 5 more fell before the Unsullied managed to fix their lines and kill the dead that broke past. One thing that shocked Grey Worm was witnessing the Unsullied that fell rise back up and attack the ones they were fighting with just seconds before. They were quickly put down and all focus returned to holding the line. They had to draw as many as they could to them so that Queen Daenerys could unleash her dragon's fury upon them when they were all crowed together like herded animals. After a second volley of dragon glass arrows, the jars of pitch could be seen flying with them, and the faint sound of them shattering could be heard through all of the chaos. The next volley of dragon glass arrows were joined by many fire arrows. The shields and the dead blocked the view of beyond. But faint burst of light could be seen, which meant the pitch and dead were catching fire. But after the first jars of pitch were flung, it would become clear that the living weren't the only ones attacking with heavy range attacks. The only indication that could be seen were the silhouettes of objects sailing across the dark clouds through the snowstorm. Suddenly heavy logs and small boulders crashed into the infantry lines, killing more than they wounded. Some of the front lines were broken through and the dead began to leak in once again. But this time the opening would not be closed. Spears splintered, and shields broken, as more projectiles came flying in and crashing down. The only creatures capable of throwing such objects had to be the giants. In front of Grey Worm, the breach began to grow larger, and many more of the Unsullied were beginning to turn into the blue-eyed puppets of evil. But he had to hold the line just a bit longer for Queen Daenerys. He failed to see a small tree trunk flying through the air and heading straight for the front lines. When the tree crashed down, it crushed the first 2 lines of men it hit and knocked back the 3 behind it before it rolled over. Luckily, it passed Grey Worm enough that he could get up, but he could feel blood starting to spill over him. Lying on top of him was an Unsullied with a branch protruding through his body and head. Feeling the drive for survival, Grey Worm shoved his comrade off of him and got back on his feet along with the few others who lived through such an attack. His helmet suffered damage that obscured his vision, so he had no choice but to remove it, and the weight of his shield was too great, so he had to sacrifice its protection as well. Now armed only with his spear, Grey Worm was ready to fight whatever rotting corpse came his way, except there were none that did. Only 7 undead giants charging at full speed, each of them carrying large branches and whalebones for clubs. Some of them even had bronze blades attached to their weapons, turning them into what could pass for axes. Immediately prepared to grab the spear of a fallen Unsullied, Grey Worm switched his grip on his and threw the spear at the giant closest to him. The spear landed dead center in the giant's face, and the great beast collapsed instantly. Grey Worm picked up another spear from the ground, and was going to throw it another one, but a hand tightly grabbed his ankles and kept him from moving. Grey Worm looked to the ground and saw 3 of his men had become 3 blue-eyed soldiers, and were slowly starting to get up. Without hesitating, Grey Worm thrusted his spear into the body of the one who had a grip on his ankle. The other 2 were on their feet by the time Grey Worm killed the creature, but his skill with the spear could easily best 2 wights. Using the shaft of the spear, Grey Worm slammed it into the head of one of the wights, knocking it backwards before piercing the armor and body of the other. Quickly retrieving his weapon from the body, Grey Worm stabbed it down into the body of the other. With the 2 distractions dead, Grey Worm turned around and readied himself for more. But to his dismay, 2 of the 7 giants that charged at the infantry were swinging their clubs like pendulums, breaking spears and bashing soldiers' bodies into mangled sacks of meat covered in armor. The giant on his right was swiftly taken down by a spear to its body, but the other one wore bone armor over its torso, which blocked 3 spears. With another powerful thrust, Grey Worm threw his spear and managed to hit the giant in its shoulder, bringing it down. But before Grey Worm could get another spear, the dead were beginning to push through the opening again, and all he had was his short sword and a dragonglass dagger. Drawing both, Grey Worm got in a fighter's stance and immediately began to engage the dead. The first pair of wights that charged at him were both practically skeletons with barely any skin covering their bones. Both of them carried cracked swords. The first one that attacked met its sword with Grey Worm's and the blade broke in half. Grey Worm lodged the dragonglass dagger in the wight's ribs and pulled the corpse in front of him to use as a shield against the other. By the time the wight he carried deteriorated and slipped to the ground, Grey Worm had decapitated the second wight by stabbing it down in the neck. Before another set of wights could attack Grey Worm, the Westerosi infantry marched to the front to take the place of the Unsullied that had perished. With the men getting control of the lines once again, Grey Worm could regroup for a moment before joining back into battle. He sheathed his sword and dagger and picked up a new spear. From atop the wall, a horn blasted twice, which meant that the passageway had most of the Night King's army inside of it. It was time for Queen Daenerys to do her part. Daenerys, watching the battle from afar, was unlike anything Daenerys had ever seen. The sounds of battle were muffled, yet distinct in a way that describing exactly what was happening, and the sight of it was like holding your breath and waiting for a great disaster to happen. Drogon was starting to become restless as the snow continued to fall and the cold winds stirred. Through the sounds of battle and the whistling of the wind, Daenerys could hear the horn blast that meant it was her turn to fight. Daenerys pulled her hood over her head and tightened her grip on Drogon's spikes, but kept her posture loose enough to not disturb her pregnancy. But then again, she was about to fly on a dragon into battle, and that was the last thing any woman should do while pregnant. Especially with twins. Maybe they'll write a song about me, Daenerys thought, before she would give the command to take flight. Sansa Stark calmly yet cautiously walked up to Drogon's side. Bran said that the Night King is almost here. Keep your eyes on the northwest, and as soon as you see him, fly as fast as you can," she called up. Daenerys nodded and Sansa backed far away from Drogon, not wanting to be thrown back when he and Lyras took flight. Daenerys felt nervous but determined. As long as she had her dragons, she would fight as much as she could. Clear of any person in the way, Drogon rose up and started to crawl forward. Before spreading his wings and pushing his legs off the ground, Drogon took off, followed by Lyras. The dragons began a gentle glide before ascending higher into the air, soaring over the archers who would be retreating to the camps away from the battle. The pace the dragons took was easy on Daenerys' body. They seemed to know that it wasn't just her they had to keep safe. But regardless of how tame the flight was, it wouldn't last long, and the wind rushing by was cold and the snow falling stung against her skin. The dragons backed away from the battle and began to head east. As the distance grew between them and those who were fighting, Drogon and Lyras climbed above the wall and flew over to the northern side. On the ground further to the west was the Dothraki horde and Westerosi cavalry galloping towards the battle. Daenerys had Drogon and Lyras pass by them once before flying down and following her Khalasar. The Dothraki screamers began to let out their cries of battle as the battle came into sight. Being a part of the charge gave Daenerys a sense of determination and ferocity greater than what she felt during the Battle of the Blackwater Rush or the burning of Slaver's Bay. Drogon and Lyras sped past them and were approaching the first bit of the haunted forest they were to burn. Daenerys remembered when Jon told her about the battle at Castle Black and how Mance Rayder lit the biggest fire the North has ever seen. Challenge accepted. The buildup of heat was quick and released in a powerful fury of fire. Drogon and Lyras unleashed streams of fire onto the haunted forest. The trees they hit were obliterated immediately, while the ones around them caught fire and spread the flames to others. Daenerys had to make one more run, igniting the forest, before she could engage the dead. She had to make sure there would be absolutely no way for them to escape. As the dragons passed the army of the dead, she kept her eyes out for any projectiles that could be thrown at them. The strength and skill of the White Walkers was great enough to kill one of her dragons. She wouldn't let it happen again. By the time the dragons finished their first pass, the entire front of the forest had erupted in fire. Smoke began to replace the snow in the air, and the heat was so great that as the dragons turned to make the last pass, Daenerys could feel it warming her face from the cold winds. As the dragons prepared for the second attack on the forest, Daenerys couldn't help but let her gaze linger to the northwest, watching for any sign of the Night King and Viserion. Unfortunately for her, the smoke of the forest fire and the falling snow made it hard to see any signs of movement in the skies. The thought of the two of them appearing prodded at the back of her mind, and she couldn't let herself forget it. The dragons unleashed their fire again onto the forest, extending the blaze that already was. Apart from what the dragons were breathing, the flames were rapidly spreading at a rate that could reduce the entire forest to ash by dawn. But the flames were so dense in the trees that absolutely nothing could pass through them unscathed, and no undead creature could either. Drogon and Lyras finished their final pass over the trees, before setting course straight for the battle. They flew into the wall of rising smoke and came out on the side of the fighting. Daenerys could see most of the dead had been herded into the passageway as planned. But then there was a great deal of the dead that weren't moving at all. They were staying behind and out of range, as if waiting for something. As the dragons got closer, a horn sounded signaling the archers to cease fire so that they wouldn't hit Daenerys or the dragons by mistake. The dead seemed to notice this and started to part ways out of the path of the dragons, but it was futile to try. Dracarys, Drogon, and Lyras unleashed their fire on the army of the dead, and as soon as the flames reached the ground, they exploded like small erupting volcanoes. The whites caught in the path screeched out, pain and fear present in their tone. The dragon fire crossed over the trench with the pitch and reignited it, causing more to be lit aflame. Daenerys looked back at the destruction the dragons had left, and for a brief moment, after seeing the fire devour the bodies of the dead, she thought the sight was beautiful. The dragons ceased firing when the infantry came too close within their range and prepared to return for another attack. As they turned around, Daenerys could see that the trench fire and that of the dragons had been extinguished for a second time. The magic of the White Walkers was powerful enough to stop the flames from spreading, but not enough to stop them from happening. Drogon's body began to heat up once again as he prepared to let out his fire against the dead. But before he could unleash his flames, Daenerys barely caught the glimpse of a lance made of ice being hurled into the air at Drogon. The heat of Drogon's body died down as the dragon quickly dodged out of the lance's path. As he dived down, Daenerys noticed that there was more than one being thrown as two more cut through the air and missing. Drogon's flying became more intense as he had to maneuver out of the way and climb higher into the sky. A fourth lance was thrown and managed to cut Drogon across his neck. The wound wasn't mortal, but it did pierce his hide deep enough for it to bleed. Drogon let out a loud roar. He began to kick his legs, and it was caused Daenerys to be jerked around. She couldn't see what was causing him to act like this, but she could tell that he was hit. Drogon wasn't falling to the ground, so it couldn't be fatal, but it was painful. Drogon turned around and began to retreat back to the south side of the wall, and WrathofAvarice followed closely underneath them. She began to breathe fire into the air at one point, but it was to destroy more lances of ice from attacking Drogon. Her smaller size made her faster, and it was easier to dodge and maneuver away from such attacks. The dragons began to lose altitude as they neared the wall, but not in a way that was a crash landing. They needed to get to the camp so the Maesters could see what was wrong with Drogon. The moment Drogon passed the border of the wall, Daenerys saw Rhaegal begin to take off from the ground. Followed by Ygritte, Jon probably saw what happened and wanted to escort her with extra protection. At least that's what she thought he was doing. From behind in the sky, a loud mutilated dragon's roar sounded across the land. Daenerys turned her head to look behind her, and emerging from the clouds was a sight that horrified her to look at. Viserion had appeared and was diving straight for her, and Drogon. His appearance had changed so much since she last saw him. Viserion's skin was a dead white color, and his wings were shredded at the edges, but the worst part was the eyes. His beautiful golden eyes were replaced by the evil blue that once contaminated Jon. Daenerys' heart jumped straight into her throat as Viserion rapidly approached her, looking ready to kill without a second thought. He opened his mouth, and a blue light began to form within his throat, the same blue as his eyes. Without hesitating, Viserion let out a bursting stream of blue fire, but it was met and stopped with the fires of Reimagined. Viserion moved out of Daenerys and Drogon's path, and retreated back to the north side of the battle. Rhaegal and Ygritte flew over Daenerys and Drogon, pursuing after Viserion and the Night King. As Jon and his dragons began their battle with the Night King and Viserion, Daenerys retreated back to the camps with Drogon and WrathofAvarice. There was a clearing near the center large enough for both of the dragons to land. WrathofAvarice was the first to land and did so with ease, but Drogon cried out as he slowly let the weight of his body be caught by the ground. He continued to screech in pain from whatever wound it was that he took. A few Maesters cautiously kept their distance from the dragon as Daenerys was let down. Gently hopping off the dragon, Daenerys immediately tried to find what it was that was causing Drogon to be in so much pain. Protruding from Drogon's left leg was a lance of ice that the White Walkers used. Meeting the eyes of the two closest Maesters to the injury, Daenerys made her way to Drogon's head. "I'll calm him down while you pull the lance free." The Maesters nodded and slowly approached to where the lance was lodged, as Daenerys came face to face with the largest of her dragons, not only in size, but temper as well. "Drogon," Daenerys said soothingly, "I know you're in pain, but you need to hold still so we can help you." Drogon growled intensely at her, but obeyed. Daenerys kept her eyes on him, but in the corner of them she could watch the Maesters work. When one of them grabbed hold of the lance's shaft, he let out a chilling scream as his hands began to freeze instantly. Jerking away from the pain, the Maester managed to pull the lance out by accident, but doing so made his hands snap off at his wrists like ice. Drogon let out the same roar he did when the lance first struck him, and his entirely body collapsed to the ground, with a great thud. Daenerys felt her heart tighten in her throat and feared that the worst had happened. Had it not been for the slow, soft breaths that came out of Drogon's nostrils, Daenerys would have thought he died then and there. She would have been at ease if not for her worry that kind of damage the Maester had just suffered could also happen to a dragon. The Maester with no hands and his companion were joined by one of the more elderly Maesters, and they both immediately saw to the Maester first. They dragged the handless man away as he passed out from the shock, and then others began to inspect Drogon's. Since Drogon wasn't moving, they were less afraid of him now. After a moment, one of the Maesters approached her. Normally a creature with such a wound would be bleeding, the Maester informed her. "But Drogon isn't," Daenerys inquired. "No. The blood and the flesh at the wound are frozen. I've never seen or read of any injury like this before." The closest thing I've seen is a severe form of frostbite. Then bring maesters who have a regular practice treating that kind of wound. Look for maesters who serve the North and the Night's Watch. At once, your grace. The maester immediately hurried away, while relaying the order to 3 other maesters, and they all split up into the camps. Daenerys never believed in gods, but she couldn't help but pray for Drogon to be all right. She couldn't bear to lose another one of her children. Daenerys looked up to the sky where she last saw Jon and hoped that no fate like this would come to him, and the dragons. Junano. Moments before, from where Jon and the dragons were, the battle was in full view. They were waiting on a hill, just behind the entire force of the foot soldiers, all of whom were itching to join the battle. Daenerys and the dragons had just finished igniting the forest, and were beginning their attack on the dead. Watching Drogon and Rhaegal breathe their fire onto the dead gave Jon a sense of satisfaction. He wanted to be there with them, but he couldn't risk the Night King catching them off guard. He had to wait and observe. As Daenerys and Drogon finished their first attack and turned around to make another, Rhaegal lifted his head up and looked out to the sky. He began to rustle and growl, his mood seemingly uneasy. Jon was almost thrown off Rhaegal as the dragon started to jerk his body around. Whoa, Rhaegal, calm down. Jon noticed that Ygritte was acting the same as Rhaegal and hoped it wasn't for the reason he thought it was. Jon warged into Rhaegal so that he could understand what was troubling the dragon so much. All it took were the 2 words that were reoccurring in Rhaegal's mind for Jon to be equally worried. It's here. Through Rhaegal's eyes, Jon could see how the dragon saw the world. Instead of seeing the living from the dead, he saw the prey from the wrong. But in the sky he could sense where the greatest source of wrong was, in the cover of the clouds, but heading straight for Daenerys and Drogon. Jon returned to himself and tightened his grip of Rhaegal. Gripple. Valid. Rhaegal and Ygritte began charging forward to gain some speed before spreading their wings and kicking off the ground. Ygritte was faster and took the lead, while Rhaegal slowly rose higher in the air and slowly gained on her. As they drew closer to Drogon and Daenerys, a loud, unearthly sound came from the sky. It was a dragon roar, but it sounded the same as a White Walker scream. After the sound was made, a dragon paler than Ygritte emerged from the clouds and dove at Daenerys and Drogon. Jon's thoughts were filled with anger and desperation. He could see Viserion's mouth begin to glow blue, and it could only mean one thing. No, you fucking don't. Rhaegal. Dracarys. Jon focused his mind to make whatever came out of Viserion's mouth to be the target of Rhaegal's fire. Viserion let out a stream of bright blue fire. At the same time, Rhaegal let out real dragon fire. The flames met, creating a small explosion in the air that turned a bright purple momentarily before Viserion ceased his attack and retreated north. As Rhaegal flew over Drogon and Rhaegal, Jon looked back to see if Daenerys was affected by what had just happened. To his relief, she was just fine, but he could see that Drogon had a lance of ice lodged in his left leg. She knows what to do, Jon thought to himself as he returned his focus on the Night King and Viserion, beginning the pursuit. Rhaegal and Ygritte flew in a tight formation and were chasing after Viserion, who was heading straight for the eastern flank of cavalry. The horses began to scatter in the charge to avoid any attack from the undead dragon. Their efforts were fruitless, as Viserion unleashed his blue fire wildly in every direction. Jon was shocked that the dragon had the capability to do such movements with a rider on him. A regular human would be thrown off the dragon's back and wouldn't be able to handle the force of being thrashed around. But then again, the rider wasn't human. A great deal of the cavalry was hit by Viserion's dragon fire, and the rest became disarrayed, trying to avoid being hit. The screams of those that were burned were unlike any Jon had heard. To Jon's advantage, Viserion attacking the cavalry helped close the distance between him and Rhaegal, enough that Jon was in range. The moment Viserion passed over the cavalry, Rhaegal and Ygritte both let out their flames at the dragon and the Night King. But instead of hitting them, the dragon fire was stopped, as the Night King turned his body and raised his hand up, using a form of magic to make the fire stop right before it could engulf him and Viserion. Rhaegal and Ygritte ceased their flames when they realized it had no effect. When that happening, Viserion dove down before quickly ascending higher into the air and heading for the clouds. "Don't let him out of our sights," Jon shouted. Rhaegal and Ygritte furiously continued the chase and rose higher into the sky, higher than Jon had ever been before. The dragons entered a gateway of clouds and blindly followed the trail of Viserion. They came out of the cover the clouds gave, and entered a kingdom in the sky. The clouds of the storm formed castles of their own, to a grandeur greater than any on the ground. Viserion maintained his distance from Jon and Rhaegal, keeping out of range, and flying in a violent way that made it difficult to keep up with. As long as the dragon could fly like that, and the Night King able to handle such force, Jon wouldn't be able to catch up. But luckily for him, he had one more dragon than the Night King. Through the magic that connects dragons with those of Valyrian blood, Jon could connect his thoughts and intentions with them, without having to ward. Jon focused his mind on Ygritte and a strategy for her to fly ahead and flank the Night King so that he and Rhaegal could intercept. Her speed was far greater than either of them, making her the only one who could do it. Knowing the plan, Ygritte sped ahead and into the cover of the clouds, hidden away from both Jon and the Night King's vision. The moment she disappeared from sight, Viserion dove down and rapidly accelerated below the clouds, almost as if he knew what Jon was planning. No matter what, Jon couldn't let the Night King out of his sight. Rhaegal dove after him, and finally had a chance to gain on the other dragon. Leaving the cover of the clouds in the sky, Viserion and Rhaegal returned within the sights of the battle, and those who were fighting in it. As the distance between the two dragons was closing, the Septon performed wicked maneuvers and flipped his body backwards, now facing Jon and Rhaegal, while still falling. The moment Jon could see blue light forming at the white dragon's mouth, he was already prepared to counter it. Dracarys! Rhaegal unleashed his fire, and once again met Viserion's. A small bit of the blue flames broke past where the dragon fire met and brushed near Jon, barely missing his face. But at so close a distance, Jon briefly felt a heat so hot it was cold. To Jon's advantage, Viserion's attack slowed him down enough that no maneuvering could let him escape. Rhaegal bore his talons as Viserion turned back around in an attempt to flee. But it was no use trying. Rhaegal slammed against Viserion and gripped tightly on the rear of his body and tail. The two dragons thrashed, desperately working to keep flying steadily while battling each other at the same time. Rhaegal's greater size gave him the advantage against his brother, but it made him a larger target. Rhaegal tried to attack at Viserion's wings to cripple him, but Viserion constantly bashed his head into Rhaegal's, keeping him away from attacking. All Jon could do was hold on as tight as he could and pray he would not fall to his death. As Rhaegal and Viserion bashed each other, Jon caught glimpse of the Night King drawing his curved ice sword from his back. Oh fuck! Rhaegal, let go! Rhaegal did as he was ordered, and released Viserion from his clutches, and put some distance between the two of them. The Night King returned his blade to his back and locked eyes with Jon for a moment. Jon would take no chances being near the Night King's weapons of ice. They were some of the only things lethal to the dragons, and he'd killed Viserion with one shot. We have to find an angle he can't reach us at, Jon thought as he thought of any direction that would work. He wouldn't be able to attack head-on. There was no way he would be able to get in any kind of position. As long as the key was they wouldn't be able to handle a collision like that. If he hadn't sent Ygritte away, he might have been able to get the advantage, but now he had no idea where she was, and she had no idea where they were. It would just have to be him and Rhaegal. Any attack from the sides would be evadable as long as Viserion could fly so violently and not worry about his rider. That leaves the only place possible would be from underneath. If Jon could get under Viserion, he could use Longclaw and maybe stab the blade deep enough to kill him. That or he could lose his position and become the chased. But it was a chance he had to take. The two dragons were flying directly over the wall, approaching the battle. Rhaegal dove down to gain some speed, before rising back up, approaching Viserion from underneath. Jon tightened his grip on Rhaegal with his left hand, while he drew Longclaw with the right. Rhaegal flew closer underneath Viserion, staying steady as to not let Jon lose his grip and fall to his death. Almost there. Jon was nearly in reach of Viserion's belly region, but he had to get closer. Gritting his teeth and tightening his grip on Longclaw, Jon prepared to thrust the sword up as hard as he could to pierce the dragon hide. With all of his might, Jon shot his sword up at the undead dragon, but Viserion gained altitude the moment the sword would have pierced him. Letting out a horrific screech, Viserion kicked down and clawed at Rhaegal's back, scratching his skin and throwing him off balance. Rhaegal jerked about so much that Jon lost grip of Longclaw and the sword slipped from his hands. No. Jon looked back at his sword and could still hear the Valyrian steel sing as it flipped through the air, heading for the south side of the wall in between the pass and the foot soldiers. It would be a miracle if anyone even noticed it. Rhaegal turned his body to turn around and get Viserion away from him, but it was no use. Instead of pulling back and chasing them, Viserion and the Night King performed the same maneuver they did just moments ago. Viserion latched his talons into Rhaegal and began attacking at him. Jon was in a spot Viserion could not reach, but he was not the target. Viserion sank his ginormous teeth into Rhaegal's left wing and began to ravage at his elbow. There was a loud snap followed by Rhaegal letting out a roar like Viserion made when he was struck by the lance of ice. Viserion released Rhaegal and began to fly up higher above them. At least that's what Jon thought. But actually, Rhaegal was falling to the ground, and fast. They passed over the wall to the south side and were set to land in nothing but hills. Rhaegal. Jon tightened his grip on his dragon's back and the ground came closer and closer. Rhaegal desperately trying to regain his balance. Jon failed to contain a scream just before the dragon crashed hard into the ground, sliding forward a great distance. The force of the impact nearly threw Jon off, but his grip was so tight it would probably crush a man's skull. It wasn't until Rhaegal slid over a small ridge in the snow that Jon was thrown off of the dragon and fell hard into a deep patch of snow that cushioned his fall. Jon's vision faded between darkness and blurry, and his chest was in pain. He found strength within him to stand up and the pain faded. His vision restored itself as he looked around to see where he was and where the dragon landed. Jon found himself about a mile away from the eastern ground forces. In between him and them was Rhaegal lying in the ground, covered in snow and dirt, and not moving. Rhaegal. Jon moved as fast as he could to his dragon, worried that he paid the ultimate price for Jon's mistake. By the time Jon reached the dragon's body, a small group of riders were headed in his direction. Rhaegal. Jon brought himself to the head of the dragon to check for any signs of life. The dragon opened his eyes and showed them to be the gold he always knew. To Jon's relief, Rhaegal was awake and breathing, but in a great deal of pain. His wing was broken, and he'd just crashed to the ground from thousands of feet in the air. Jon's attack on the Night King had failed. The Night King. Jon shot around and scanned the sky when he realized he'd completely forgotten about Viserion and the Night King. Jon thought they would have been hiding in the clouds again, but instead they were out for all to see, flying at the north side of the west part of the wall. Without Rhaegal, Jon couldn't keep Viserion away from the battle, and could only watch. Viserion has unleashed his fire onto the west wall, and was doing far more destruction than the other 4 dragons did when they first brought down the wall. The 4,000 archers stationed up there had absolutely no chance of escape. The wall began to crumble slowly, and the ground shook stronger than an earthquake. Through the sounds of the wall crashing down, Jon could only imagine what the screams of those falling to their death sounded like. He failed his task, and now the living had to suffer for it. By the time the west wall had fallen, Viserion was starting to move towards the east wall, and preparing to repeat the destruction. Your Grace. Jon turned to see the group of riders arriving just now. Leading them was Beric Dondarrion and his uncle Benjen, who dismounted immediately. Are you all right? I'll be fine, but Rhaegal, he can't fly. I don't think he can even move from here. Benjen turned to one of the riders who came with him, a brother of the Watch. Ride for the camps as fast you can and bring back 4 maesters with you, who have any knowledge of dragons and healing. The brother nodded and spurred his horse to ride, as fast as he could. Jon placed a hand over Rhaegal's head and stroked at the warm scales, hoping that it might bring comfort to the dragon. Jon, Benjen said, you need to see this. Jon turned his head to see Benjen and the other riders looking to where the wall collapsed. Faintly, Jon could see the dead passing the wall and entering the south. Benjen turned back to Jon. As much I know you don't want to, we have to leave the dragon here and join the battle. I can't leave. Brit will watch over him, but you need to get to another dragon and back in the sky. Drogon is in too much pain to fly, but Lyras isn't, and she's guarding your wife at the camps. As much as it pained Jon, he did have to leave Rhaegal. He turned to the dragon and knelt down to his head. I will come back, I promise. Rhaegal gave a soft growl as Jon got up and joined Benjen. By the way, Benjen said as he snapped his fingers to another one of his brothers of the Watch, You should be careful not to lose this again. The man of the watch brandished Longclaw from his side and tossed it to Benjen, who returned it to Jon. How did you find it? Jon asked, as he sheathed it in its scabbard. We didn't, Bran did. Remind me to thank him. Jon mounted an empty horse that was brought with the other riders, and Benjen mounted his. It's 6 miles of deep snow from here to the camps. The longer we're down here, the longer your other dragon has to fight the Night King alone, up there. Benjen motioned up the clouds where Ygritte was speeding by while being chased by Viserion. The dead have a way past our main defense. We need to take the offense now. The Dornish Reach forces are closest, but their numbers are too little. The men of the Stormlands and the Wildlings are their best hope of reinforcements. What about the rest of you? Jon asked. I'll ride back to the Fiery Hand and bring them into battle, Edric informed. And you're on the ground now, nephew. Benjen reminded. You need protection even if you're better than everyone here. We'll escort you to the camps. Jon nodded and looked over to the men who wouldn't be coming with him. Good luck to you all. All of them spurred their horses and took off to their respective destinations. Jon could only hope that he could get to the camps before the dead. If the Western forces fell, then there might not be any camps to return to. Edric, witnessing the collapse of the wall from the head of the Western Division of the ground forces, was nothing like Edric thought it would be. When the king and queen returned from their journey to bring down the wall, Edric imagined it as a spectacle to watch in a marvelous but terrifying way. Watching the wall collapse and hearing 4,000 screams turn silent was horrifying, nothing that Edric could have imagined possible. Not only that, but much of the fallen rubble had tumbled onto the western battlements, killing many of the soldiers posted there and opening up the pass. Edric had 5,000 at his command, alongside another 15, standing behind him, and he could feel their discontentment. He would be lying to himself if he denied feeling the same. They were all preparing themselves to fight the dead if they broke through the infantry lines, but none of them were ready to witness the instantaneous deaths of so many. The feelings only worsened when the undead dragon flew over to the east side of the wall to do again what damage it caused on the west. But great waves of relief came over everyone when the king's white dragon shot down from the sky and attacked it. The undead dragon switched its attention to the white dragon and began a chase, leaving the east wall intact. But all of the unnerving feelings increased again when a few signs of movement at the rubble turned into many. Knowing it to be impossible for any to survive such a catastrophe, Edric knew that it had to be the army of the dead coming through their new opening in the wall, and it was far more than he thought it would be. At first it looked like over 10,000, then 20, and the number didn't go down. Lord Edric, a lord of the Reach, said, "We need to take defensive formations now." No, Edric told them. The king said that going on the defensive never works in a situation like this. We need to bring the fight to them before they can surround and overwhelm us. But my lord, that's madness. Charging to meet an army of dead soldiers that could turn the living into one of them. Of course it was mad. It's the best chance we've got. The two lords looked each other questioningly before both nodding at Edric. We'll order our men to ready for a charge. They rode away to return to the heads of their armies. Edric turned to face his men and saw them turning from panic to the fury of battle. They were itching to fight, and so was he. Men of Dorne, Edric shouted, this night we cross swords with the likes of evil itself. Don't charge into the fight to die for your country. Charge into the fight to live for it. Fight and live for friends, your family, and for yourselves. Edric drew both First Light and Dawn from their scabbards and raised them high into the air. The Dornish under his command raised their spears and shields with their lord, and cheered for him and themselves. Edric turned around and faced the oncoming horde of dead men. He took a moment and looked down at his Dane surcoat. Sewn by his wife Neela before he left, Edric wore it over his breastplate rather than under it, like many did. Not one tear, I promise, Edric said as he charged and led his men forward to bring the might of Dorne to meet the dead. The feeling of charging into battle with thousands behind him made Edric feel like he was leading a stampede or an avalanche straight to obliterate worthless creatures. But these creatures he saw felt no pain, wielded weapons, and could turn those they kill into more meat for their army. Nothing could bring greater glory than fighting such a force. Edric let out a battle cry with his forces as the dead let out what one would think was their response. Raising first light in front of his body and Dawn low to his side, Edric took his last moments to enjoy the peace before the fight. He locked eyes with a jawless skeleton, wielding a chipped axe, and knew that would be his first kill. The White raised his excuse for a weapon in a wild style of attack, but was met with Dawn slashing through its empty skull and extinguishing the light of its eyes. The sounds of thousands of weapons clashing and attacking sang through the air. Every time Edric cut down one bloodless foe, another would take its place, different and more vicious than the last. Despite that, Edric let his skill guide First Light and Dawn to cut down every foe that he faced. The Valyrian steel and star metal that made his swords swiftly sliced through the cold monsters that came into their path. But one stray swing trapped First Light into a large wooden club held by an equally large wilding White. He was no giant, but the White was just shy of being the size of the mountain, Sergrigar Clegane. Edric freed First Light from the grip of the wood just as the White raised his club up to swung at him. Edric jumped to the side to be clear of the club's path and would have thrusted Dawn into the White's body, but another half-decomposed White wielding a stark shield bashed into Edric's body, knocking him backwards. The White wielding the shield swung a long sword at Edric, the blade barely missing Edric's body, and the tip just cutting through Edric's surcoat. Edric took notice and became filled with rage. "You cunt!" Ducking underneath the giant White's club, Edric thrusted both of his swords into the shield-wielding White's body. He then tore them out, completely severing the White's body from its legs. Using the momentum of his attack, Edric ducked down and severed the giant White's leg with both swords. As the great body fell onto its back, Edric parried another White's axe with First Light, while stabbing Dawn into the giant White's body. The moment the blue light left the eyes of the White, Edric had already pulled Dawn out of the White's body and blocked another weapon, the fury of battle flowing through his blood. The ranks of undead men were starting to be joined by undead animals climbing past the rubble of ice. Snow bears, stags, and dire wolves. Dozens of each were shoving aside many Whites to get to the front of the battle, not caring how much damage they did to those that should have been their allies. Edric had just decapitated 3 Whites at once, with First Light, when he heard a strange snarl that sounded like it was coming straight for him. Edric looked around and saw a large direwolf charging straight for him. Its gray fur was stained with blood from multiple stab wounds, and the flesh of its lips was gone, exposing all of the teeth. The speed of the direwolf was so fast that Edric didn't have enough time to properly take a stance against such a creature. The wolf leapt into the air straight for Edric and opened its jaws, ready to sink them into whatever flesh they could. Edric tripped backwards and fell onto his back, now unable to evade an attack. Out of sheer reflex, Edric raised Dawn above him, and the blade entered the mouth of the direwolf, right as it landed. The creature's body collapsed on Edric, motionless and truly deceased. With the strength he could muster, Edric shoved the direwolf's body off of him, though it felt like shoving a full-grown horse instead. Then again, the direwolf was the size of a full-grown horse. Pressing a boot to the direwolf's head and gripping the hilt of Dawn, he yanked the sword out of the jaw of the great beast. He shook off his brief feelings of panic and returned to the fight at hand. But even with the force of 20,000 Dornish and Reach soldiers, it wasn't enough to hold off the dead. Their strength and numbers were beginning to be outmatched. The dead that were crossing through the rubble were nearly doubled, and the lines of the living made were spread too thin. Luckily for them, they weren't alone. A great host of soldiers made of the wildlings, riverlands, and stormlands charged from the central force of foot soldiers to join the rest of their allies and hold off the growing force of the dead. They blocked off the dead's only way to flank the infantry lines and catapults to the east of the battle. The lines on the west side were too thin, and if passed, would leave the army vulnerable. Edric fell back from the center of the battle and pushed through the living and the dead to the west, rallying a great deal of Dornish wildlings and men of the Reach to fortify the lines. But by the time they got there, a small army of Whites, no more than a couple thousand, pushed through. But instead of attacking the sides, they continued to advance west. Edric didn't understand until he saw where their destination was. The camps. The dead were going after the Maesters, healers, and the children to add to the ranks of their army. Edric turned to face the men that followed him. Defend the camps. He charged through what he could before breaking through the armies and chasing after the Whites. Though he and those following him ran as fast as they could, the dead had no fatigue in them, and had a great head start. They wouldn't intercept them in time. Edric's only hope was that either the forces that retreated could hold off long enough, or that they could run faster than the dead.